Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yep, we're ready to go. Okay. All right, members, very welcome to this morning's meeting for the Committee for Communities. This is a fully virtual meeting this morning, so only our second one. I think our first one lasted all of 6 minutes. So let's hope that we can get along here without too many glitches. So I'll just start by then informing members if you have any declaration of interest on any issues relating to today's meeting, you must declare them. I'm going to move then on to agenda item 1, which is apologies. I have an apology from Kelly. Do we have any other apologies, Janice? No. Okay, thank you. I'll move on then to agenda item 2, which is chairperson's business. Members, you've been provided at page 5 with a letter from the Speaker in relation to legislative pressures facing the Assembly before the end of the mandate. In summary, the Business Committee agreed that the Speaker should write to committees to note that legislation will be a priority for plenary time in the remaining sittings of the mandate, and that it would be helpful if committees could avoid bringing non-essential motions to the Assembly for debate before dissolution. There may be an opportunity to allow for a short second stage debates for the 4 remaining private members' bills. There is not realistically time remaining for those bills to receive committee scrutiny and then come forward to complete the remaining stages. So the Business Committee is not taking those bills into account for the planning of future plenary sittings. So can I just then ask if members any comments? Are they content to note? Content? I don't know. I can't hear anybody, so I don't know. So if you put your thumbs up, that's fine. I assume we're content because there's no hands up. All right. Okay. I'm going to move on then to agenda item 3, which is draft minutes. Members, you'll find the draft minutes of the meeting of the 17th February 2022 at page 9 of your pack. Are members content to agree the minutes as drafted? Again, I don't know if you are, but there's no hands up, so I will take it that you're content to agree the minutes as drafted.
Content, Chair.
With members in now, good stuff. Thank you.
Lauren Alexander.
Okay, I can hear you all speaking. Just to let you know, you are all live now on. So anybody having a conversation, you can be quiet. Then I'll move you on then to agenda item 4, which is matters arising. You've been provided at page 18 with a departmental response in relation to Regina Chelly House. The housing executive has advised that it has been able to provide alternative accommodation for the majority of residents. However, there is one remaining resident in the facility who has been offered a number of temporary accommodation options which have not been accepted. The resident is being provided with ongoing support provided by extern and housing executive staff are urgently sourcing alternative suitable accommodations. Members, have you any comments on that? Or are you content to note? Any comments or content to note? Content. Okay, thank you. Members, then you'll find page 19, there's a copy of the latest report from their Examiner of Statutory Rules. The Examiner draws attention to SR 2022-15, the Housing Benefit and Universal Credit Housing Costs, Executive Determinations, Amendment and Modification Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022. The Department has acknowledged that the regulations were laid in breach of the 21-day rule, and the Examiner is content that the Department has provided a satisfactory explanation for the breach. Again, members, have you any comments or are you content to note? Content? Good stuff. All right, members, thank you for that. That was a really short matters arising today. We're going to now move on then to agenda item 5, which is a departmental briefing on the sub-regional Stadia programme. So members, you'll find a copy of the ministerial letter on this issue as at page 32 of your packs. So we have with us in our meeting today with Catherine Hill and Shirley Chambers. You remember last week, members, we had invited the Minister to come along. She was unable to attend due to a long-standing commitment in her diary, but thankfully her officials are here to brief us. So Catherine and Shirley are both very welcome. Catherine, is it yourself that's going to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So I was just going to give a very brief verbal overview and then happy to take any questions. So really by way of very quick recap, In March 2011, the executive endorsed the £36.2 million investment for the sub-regional Stadia programme for soccer as resources became available. So proposals were based on the 5 strands identified in the IFA's 2011 paper entitled Strategic Facility Need. So a 12-week public consultation took place in 15-16, 1,079 responses received, and the consultation report has been published on the department's website. So as the committee is aware, given the passage of time since the public consultation, the Minister requested a refresh and re-engagement exercise. This was to provide a robust and up-to-date evidence base to inform decisions on the shape and scope. So key findings of the club survey and the one-to-one stakeholder interviews were shared with the committee at our last briefing session. So at a strategic level, the exercise identified a number of changes since 2011, 3 of which I just wanted to mention briefly. The first is the establishment of Nipple. So for those who aren't familiar with Nipple, it's the organising body for the top 4 tiers of the football pyramid. So these are the performance end of the game. So Nipple is a private company. It has 43 member clubs from the Premiership, Championship, Premier Intermediate League and Women's Premiership. So the establishment of Nipple really placed a direct and strategic focus on the top tiers of football in Northern Ireland. This goes alongside the IFA's focus on the entire pyramid of participation. Second thing I wanted to touch on was the growth of grassroots participation. So participation in football has increased in recent years, with clubs growing, particularly in youth numbers. There's been an increased profile of and participation by underrepresented groups, so girls, women, over 35 males, and those with a disability. So gaps still remain, but progress is being made. And future investment will need to incorporate inclusive design, and management of stadia facilities will need to reflect accessibility guidelines. It's particularly noted that the female game has moved on considerably, and recently the Women's Premiership welcomed 2 new teams, Lisburn Ladies and Mid Ulster Ladies, and this increases the number of teams to 8. Now the third thing is the increase in spectator numbers. So along with the growth in participation, there's been a growth in spectators, 25% increase since 2010-11. But it's fully recognised that the facilities at clubs throughout Northern Ireland aren't adequate to attract and support participation or spectating, particularly from underrepresented groups. So what has happened since we last briefed the committee? So the advisory working group has continued to meet to progress the development of the programme. To date, the group has met on 9 occasions, and at the most recent meetings on the 4th of November and 9th of February, discussions really focused on the critical success factors of the programme. So this included, for example, how we achieve a fair geographical spread, the level of partnership funding, environmental sustainability, financial sustainability of clubs, how we allow funding levels to allow for ambition and success, and how we ensure that projects maximise inclusion, community focus and collaboration. So as set out by the Minister, executive endorsement is required for the refreshed proposals for programme delivery. However, the Minister has confirmed her commitment to investigating options available to progress this programme before the end of the current mandate. The Minister has met with representatives from the IFA and Nipple last week. She's also written to her ministerial colleagues, reaffirming her commitment to deliver for football and asking that they support her efforts to progress the programme as a matter of urgency. The Minister has also written to the Finance Minister to request assistance on how best to address the cost increases due to inflation and how to secure additional budget. So by way of next steps, in the absence of an executive, Minister Hargreaves is considering means by which the programme can be progressed. Departmental officials, supported by the AWG, will continue to develop the programme, including the application process. This will inform the development of the required business cases and prepare the programme for launch upon receipt of the necessary approvals. And once approved, a bid will be made for funding for the programme, and it's the understanding of the department that any executive allocation will be prioritised, given that this is a flagship project and a commitment in NDNA. So I'm just going to stop there and happy to take any questions.
Okay, Catherine, thank you for coming into us today. You'll be well aware that this is something that this committee has discussed time and time again since its inception back in 2020, and members have got very vexed over it at times because of the lack of movement in this. So I am going to actually go to members first because I think that they have shown a considered interest in this over the time. So I have Andy, then I have Stephen, and then I have Ciara. So I'm going to bring in Andy first. If we can bring Andy into the spotlight, please.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll try to keep my remarks brief. That was a very helpful overview, and I don't think any of it's disputed by any member across the committee. We appreciate that this exercise had to be undertaken, as there had been a change over the course of the years. Where we are concerned, and certainly I would have concern, is the Minister stated on numerous occasions in the Assembly chamber, as far back as May 2021, to my party colleague Mike Nesbitt, that she would be bringing forward the proposals on the way forward in the coming weeks. And what I would like to better understand or tease out is, why wasn't that brought forward in the coming weeks? Was the Minister misbriefed in relation to where they were in respect to bringing this forward, or did the work hit snags?
And no, Andy, I suppose the Minister has been considering, she has been actively considering, and she has reiterated that. She'd always stated her intention to present the proposals for the end of this before the end of this mandate. So she's still working through that process. She is committed to see what she can do. So, like I said, she has written to her ministerial colleagues. She intends to write to them again today. And she has been engaging with the IFN Nipple, and she will continue to do so.
No, and I appreciate that, Catherine, and it's probably not for you to answer for the Minister in relation to the coming weeks, and perhaps, Chair, we will want to seek a follow-up meeting with the Minister to allow the Minister to elaborate on that as to why in May 2021 was she stating coming weeks, and again I think that was repeated in September and October, or August and September, and many clubs who communicated with me were optimistic with that they were going to see something coming out very soon, so we might want to explore that. Can I just ask Catherine then, has legal advice been taken in relation to where the Minister can go with this then, if the Minister gets support from executive colleagues that remain in place? Is the legal advice saying that this could be rolled out?
So the department has shared advice that it has received with the Minister. At the moment, she's still considering her options as to where we go in the absence of an executive. And the first step of that is the engagement with her ministerial colleagues. And she will explore all options once she gets the feedback that she needs there.
Okay, and also, Catherine, you'd mentioned the need maybe for an uplift to the programme to recognise the increase in costs over the many years that this programme's been delayed. Is there any indication of what sort of uplift we're talking about at this stage?
No, and I suppose in a way, Andy, that's probably the $1 million question. And you'll have heard Nipple in recent days talking about the necessity versus the desires of some of the clubs as well. Now, we have written to the Finance Minister, and he has reverted to say he will work with us in terms of the construction and the inflation indices. As I'm sure you appreciate, it's very complex in that it's very much dependent on the scale and the type of the construction projects as to how the indices will impact on them. And the sector is still very volatile at the moment. But the Finance Minister has reverted to say CPD will work with us as we try to crystallise what that uplift should look like.
Okay, no problem. Sure, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Okay, Andy, thank you. Can I bring in Stephen, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Obviously, we welcome the commitment that you've reiterated today. Obviously, you were before the committee in December, and in that period, you reiterated your commitment to it. I suppose just a couple of points. Obviously, this has been the Minister's in tray from January 2020, now over 2 years ago, and the delay is very, very disappointing, and it's felt from clubs right across the country. In August 21, the Minister advised me about our proposals going in the coming weeks. And then that was reiterated in September 21, the commitment in the short time ahead. And clubs have spent considerable money in terms of planning and getting things in place that this scheme was ultimately coming. And just reiterate that point about the recognition of more budget will be required given the rising cost of materials and so on since the £36 million was allocated. Just a couple of questions. Was there any other issues or projects that were prioritised over this important scheme which maybe caused the delay?
Not that I'm aware of, Stephen. I mean, the Minister has indicated she's been actively considering the programme, so not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah, but there's a real feeling.
Maybe I've misunderstood your question there.
Yeah, was there any other projects that the Minister prioritised over this to have this sitting in her in tray for over 2 years?
I suppose the one obvious one that comes to mind, I suppose, is the response to the pandemic. So that undoubtedly did delay us really in the first 6 months from January 2020, when resources were being redeployed in terms of, for example, Shirley was involved in facilitating the food parcels. So that will undoubtedly have slowed us down at the outset. But I fully acknowledge the frustration of the sector. You know, I hear it whenever we speak to the clubs, when we speak to Nipple, when we speak to the IFA. But it is a priority, and you know the minister is actively looking to see how she can drive this forward.
Yeah, and the pandemic, undoubtedly impacted all departments, and
Yep.
and things like the economy kept moving, money went out to businesses in the millions of support. The schools kept staying open, school enhancement programs continued, and so on. So I think the football community and fans right across the country are tired of excuses, and appreciate it's ultimately the minister's call, Catherine. But it's just expressing the frustrations out there. Just in terms of the next steps, because obviously that's what we all want ultimately. When will these refreshed priorities and the new criteria be published? And do you think that will incorporate things like training facilities, and focus on grassroots, for boys and girls, and those with disabilities and so on? It's just a final point. I know I met with some of your colleagues, even in terms of a local club within my constituency, Bangor Football Club. We obviously have a live planning application in, and are patiently waiting on an upgrade of this. They really want to develop them into more community hubs. So we can't stress the urgency of this. There's been too enough delay.
No, and as a Bangor girl myself, Stephen, I'm familiar with the Bangor Club. We obviously can't speak to the shape and scope of the programme until the proposal is shared by the minister, but disability, inclusion, female participation, all those aspects are key priorities for the minister, so they will undoubtedly factor in the future programme. In terms of when the proposals will be made available, that's what the minister's trying to work through at the moment. So that's what she's looking at, how she can take this forward, and that's what she's writing to her colleagues about at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Catherine.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. If we can then bring in Ciara, please. I have Ciara and then Mark. So, Ciara.
Just thank you first and foremost, Catherine, for giving us that update, and I welcome obviously the minister confirming obviously the key work that you're doing to try and progress the sub-regional Stadia programme. Just two questions, one of which is similar to Stephen in relation to the process. It's going to be a highly competitive, obviously, but there's a lot of clubs are waiting 10 years for this. And I know the minister over the last 2 years, he's done extensive benchmarking and review and research. So just two wee questions. One question regarding the whole application process and the guidance. Can you assure us that it will be an open and fair process for all clubs to be able to apply to, and that clubs in the application process clearly see obviously the criteria, the scoring matrix, etc. And then secondly, the IFA and obviously the NI Football League obviously have been extensively involved in that, and obviously a lot of clubs, all clubs across the north are involved in that. See, in relation to clubs that play in the League of Ireland, like Derry City Football Club, can you confirm that those clubs will also be able to apply for such a fund?
So as to your first question around the openness and transparency of the process, absolutely. And, we will work with clubs to make sure those that need more support that get it. As regards Derry City, yes, subject to any particular strand analysis, Derry City will be eligible. It will be for clubs obviously based in Northern Ireland. So I suppose Derry City would be the only club from the League of Ireland. But we have been engaging with Derry City and Strabane Council on that, and actually Shirley briefed them last, I think, about the end of November. So there has been engagement with Derry City.
And just one other one. See, for clubs, obviously, I was out visiting a club locally in relation to, obviously, with the floods 4 or 5 years ago, their premises were just decimated. Now, I've been out with them. They're currently working up. They're looking at land, a business case, etc. A club like that, are they also able to apply?
Yeah, I mean, I assume you're talking about Institute.
Yes.
They obviously saw the awful photographs of Dergview as well at the weekend.
Yes.
And yeah, with the shape and the scope still needs to be considered. There's no reason why those clubs that can't apply. What we will be encouraging is more collaboration, more ground sharing, more innovation. So I suppose it's in what they're applying for. I mean, obviously Dergview will be working with the relevant authorities and flood defences and whatever else needs to be taken forward in that regard. But absolutely, it will be open for those clubs to apply.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, thank you, Ciara. If I could now bring in Mark Durkin, please, and bring in Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Catherine and Shirley for coming along. Sorry the Minister couldn't make it, because I think some of these questions are best put to the Minister, and only the Minister will probably really be able to answer them. But that won't stop me asking you anyway, Catherine. And maybe a wee bit of a follow-on. My screen froze a bit, so I mightn't have got the answer, but it was in terms of those answers or commitments that the Minister had given 10 months ago, that she'd be able to bring it to the executive within weeks, and then she gave it again a couple of months after that, and a couple of months after that. This is where I put you in the spot, Catherine. In your opinion, was it ready to go to the executive at any of those points, or was it, how near was it to readiness? Because the whole purpose of the refresh and re-engagement programme was to consider rising costs, and would a greater budget be needed. But all this time, I mean, particularly over the past 2 years, costs have absolutely skyrocketed. So the lack of urgency, and I appreciate pandemic took priority, I do appreciate that, but the lack of urgency has actually led to an increased bill or cost.
So I suppose the proposals aren't ready until the Minister has had time to consider the evidence and shape them and make her proposals. So that is what has been taking the time. It is her consideration. There has been quite a lot of quite significant changes to football since 2011, and I do appreciate, it is 11 years. And I suppose it's making sure that the investment meets both the current and the future needs of what is very diverse field of clubs, really from the very small grassroots clubs right up to our Premiership clubs.
No, I understand that, and I welcome the growth and popularity of the game, and that more people are participating from different backgrounds. But I think I'm on record on this committee before as having said I suspected that the Minister was taking the ball into the corner flag to let the clock run down and make the announcement as close to the election as possible to get some sort of benefit out of it. And now that the referee's blown up early and we've missed the chance to score, I know you can't comment on that, obviously, Catherine. Now, Ciara had asked in terms of the eligibility of clubs in our neck of the woods. I just want to, I suppose, re-emphasise the importance of this having a spread across the region. I know where the concentration of clubs is, but it is a sub-regional Stadia thing. In the original proposals of the 36 million, I think £10 million of that was earmarked for Glentoran. I'm not saying they don't need it or aren't worthy of it, but when that's nearly a third of the pot, it's vitally important, I think, that there's a fair spread across other places as well as other clubs.
So, I mean, the need for a spread of investment and access to improved facilities across the region has been a common theme throughout the review exercise. And we looked at participation levels across the various council areas. So, for example, in Mid and East Antrim, you've got 13% participating as compared to 6% in Mid Ulster. But what was clear was that there's a need for investment in every council area. So we have been working with the advisory working group on how best to secure that regional spread across the various strands of the programme. So, it's at the forefront of our minds, Mark. And you're right, it is a sub-regional programme and it's intended to deliver that.
No, thank you, Catherine. And finally, Catherine, when you were speaking there in response to someone else, you described this scheme as a flagship project. Is that just your terminology, or is that approved executive terminology that this is a flagship project?
It is considered a flagship project. Sorry, Mark, I don't know if I cut across you there or if you faded out.
No. Sorry, you're okay. Continue.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it is a flagship project in the department's terminology.
Okay. Thanks a million, Catherine. Thank you, Shirley.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Andy, you have your hand up again. Bring Andy back in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick follow-up questions. Catherine, see, in terms of when you were advising about the Minister approaching her ministerial colleagues, has those letters gone already, or are they being drafted?
Andy, a letter issued last week, and another letter is due to issue, I think, today, if it hasn't already issued today.
What is the time frame then for turnaround on that, Catherine, in terms of giving the Minister time to make decision?
Sorry, in terms of the other ministers responding, or? Yeah,
is the Minister set, an anticipated response time on that to allow her to consider where she can go with this?
Not in the letter that issued last week. It was just reflected that it was urgent and that it needed urgent consideration.
Okay, and in terms of the wider proposals of the refresh and re-engagement project, when was the Minister furnished with all of the information, the new proposals to consider? At what point was that all given to the Minister to consider?
So that was in summer 2021.
Summer 21?
Yeah. So I'm just checking my years.
Okay. Have you got a month?
End of June, I think.
End of June. Okay. So that would fit in line with what the Minister said to my colleague in May 2021 then. But then obviously the Minister has taken from June 21 up till now to be considering those proposals. That's a lengthy period of time. Not asking you to comment on that, Catherine. And finally, I'd appreciate it if you had this to hand, but if you don't, if you could come back to us ASAP on it, as I've been waiting on a written question being answered now for a considerable period of time, and it's well outside of the prescribed time. How much has been spent to date on sub-regional Stadia programme? Every penny that's been spent in terms of administration, all of these refresh and re-engagement consultations. Do you have any detail on that?
No, Andy, I don't have that to hand, but I can follow up on the Assembly question.
Appreciate that, Catherine. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Andy. No other member has indicated they want to come in. I think following on from that, members that we probably do require, not probably, bring in the Minister to speak on that. Hold on, I'm reading messages here from clerks and everything else as I go along. Okay, yeah, we do. They're quite right. We know that clubs will be listening in. We know that Nipple and IFA will be listening into this briefing today. All members in this committee and all parties in our assembly have been lobbied greatly on this issue. It is really very disappointing in your answers, some of your answers there, that this information has been sitting almost ready to go for some time, and at the 11th hour now, we're having to deal with this with only a few weeks left of the Assembly before we go into Purda. So really, really disappointing. So I do think we need to get the Minister in. Look, Catherine and Shirley, thank you very much for your time here today. We appreciate you coming in front of us, and we're glad that you were able to answer the questions as openly and as honestly as possible. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, members, just before I move on to our next witness session, I was reading off the wrong brief this morning, which is not like me at all, but anyway, that's another story. So I had meant to mention in my chair's brief, if you just bear with me here, this is all new to me, having to chair a meeting virtually, so just bear with me. It was just to remind members that last week in committee, we all received a letter from NIACTA highlighting concerns with the proposed regulations. NIACTA are still very keen to brief the committee. Now, I know we have Martina Campbell with us later on in the briefing on further amendments to the betting bill, one of which seems to deal with NIACTA's concerns. So if members are in agreement, even after that briefing with Martina, we can decide then if we still want to hear from NIACTA. We do know that this is going through the Assembly under affirmative procedures, so therefore we should be fully aware of what we are voting in favour of when it comes to affirmative procedure. Also, members, just one more thing that has just come through. Also, Housing Rights have sent us a paper So that's going to be sent through via your packs this morning, and it's in concerns over amendments 13 and 15 of the private tenancies bill yesterday. I know that they, along with others, my phone I think didn't stop after that debate yesterday, raising many concerns. That various different community and multi-sector especially have around both of those amendments. So members, we could discuss that further at agenda item 7 when we have David Polly in discussing the notice to quit consultation. So it's just to let members know that that is there. We probably will take a wee short break after our next presentation to let members have read that in full as well. So just to say that, and I hope, and just to say to Janice, I've printed off an older version of the chair's brief, so if there's anything different, let me know. I'll maybe print her off a newer version when we do take a short break. So I'm going to move on, members, to agenda item 6, which is the departmental briefing on Licensing and Registration of Clubs Act Phase 2 commencement. Members, you'll find this at page 35 of your pack. So can I then welcome Carol Reid and Liam Quinn to the meeting today? There we go. There's
Morning,
Carol.
Chair.
Liam, good to see you. So if you want to go ahead and brief the committee, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just sort of give a brief overview, and then Carol can go through the technical details. The briefing today is about a technical problem with the commencement of Section 11 of the 2021 Act. Section 11 refers to tap rooms, which was the committee amendment originally. The difficulty was only spotted at a very late stage when it came to drawing up procedures for court applications. And that's why we've had to delay things slightly. Now, when something like this happens, and it happens occasionally, but it's very unfortunate when it happens. But the first thing we need to do is get to the bottom of exactly what is the problem and what is the extent of the problem. In this case, it only affects the application for a tap room. It won't impact on the ability of a local producer to apply for a license to sell to the public online or at farmers markets, or to organise tours and give out samples at the end of the tour. After that, we went to the point of making sure that the stakeholders on the committee were aware of the delay and what the issue was. And then we moved on to trying to develop a strategy to solve the problem and put it right. We had extensive meetings and discussions with both DSO and OLC, and we've now identified a way forward using secondary legislation, which will mean that the delay will be quite short. So I'll pass over to Carol, and Carol can give you a bit more detail if that's what the members require.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. So I'll give a wee bit of background. I know that some of the members weren't here during the progress of the bill at the committee stage of the bill. So the bill itself received royal assent on the 26th of August. And I mean, throughout the process, we had said that phase 1 was likely to commence on the 1st of October, which it did, with the intention of phase 2 being commenced on the 6th of April. So just before Christmas, the department provided an update to the committee on provisions for phase 2. That update was sort of in the context of what was expected to be included. And the reason why it's done that way is because any other parties really that need to be involved in the process, that need to give the department assurances that they would be prepared and ready in time for our commencement date, those assurances need to be received before any commencement order can be made. So that's why there's no sort of guarantee, and it's a definitive. That was explained to local producers during a meeting early in January, and they were advised at that time that because of the 2 new court applications that were required for Section 11 for the tap rooms, that was the only final assurance that the department was waiting on before we could actually say, yes, definitely this is going to be included, and we could move on to then the commencement order. So officials obviously throughout the process, we had been engaged with the legal advisor and the secretariat to the Court Rules Committee, DOJ officials and court officials. And the week after that meeting with the producers and their representatives, the legal advisor had actually advised that there was that procedural issue that Liam referred to in Section 11. So, I mean, basically it's the new Article 52E that's created by Section 11 allows a local producer, once they've been granted a liquor licence, to apply for a suitability order for on sale. So that's your tap rooms part. that application can be made to the county court at the same time of them applying for their licence, or it can be made to a magistrate's court later on. The new Article 52F then that's included in Section 11 allows the holder, once they've been granted their licence and their suitability order, to then apply for those specific authorisations for the 104 dates. That application can also be made to the county court at the time of them applying for their licence and their suitability order, or later on through the magistrate's court. And Article 52F states that the procedure for following all of that process is set out in Schedule 10 to the licensing order. Now, the issue then is that Schedule 10 only applies to applications which are made to the magistrate's courts. It doesn't provide for that notice for Article 52F applications to the county court to be served on the chief clerk, and it doesn't allow for the form and content of the notice to be prescribed by county court rules. So there's a varies issue there in terms of what can actually be done. So obviously it's quite a technical issue. So officials sought advice immediately from the Departmental Solicitor's Office. There was a possibility that consequential powers that were actually provided for in Section 45 of the Act might have been able to be relied on. That initial legal advice confirmed that there were risks associated with that approach, and the result then being that initially it appeared that primary legislation was going to be required. Obviously at that time there was no time available in the current mandate to be able to progress a new piece of primary legislation. So at that point the committee was provided with an update saying that there was going to be a delay in commencing Section 11. In that update, it was also included the detail then, the guaranteed detail of what was going to be included in the Phase 2 commencement order and the 3 SL1s that were associated with that. So Liam has already said that the update confirmed that Section 10 was going to be able to go ahead. It's included in the commencement order. That will allow the local producers to get their initial licence, to go to court to get that licence for their off sales. So that allows them to do their on-sign sales as well, allows them to go to other licensed premises for sort of food and drink and craft events, and it allows them in certain circumstances to sell their wares at unlicensed places and premises. But consumption will only be limited to samples in those circumstances until Section 11 can be commenced. So at that point as well, the departmental website was updated. An email was issued to the local producers and the representative bodies. We have had ongoing contact throughout the whole process from individual producers who would make contact with ourselves, some of their solicitors on their behalf. There have been AQWs and letters from MLAs, and the updates were always provided then as and when they were available. So as Liam said again, Liam, we both met with First Legislative Council, with the Bill's drafts person and with the SO to discuss the issue in more detail because of its technical nature. Following that, then subsequent conversations, a way to progress via secondary has been identified. The Minister has instructed officials to progress what is required to commence Section 11. We remain engaged with the legal advisor and the Secretariat of the Court Rules Committee. I had my most recent meeting with them there at 8:30 this morning. So everybody's on board to progress this as far as we can. So although there should be a delay, it shouldn't be a significant one. It has just taken time to work out exactly what is required, but it's now that is in motion now.
Okay, look, thank you for that update. I mean, you will know that this committee, it seemed like weeks or months we were deliberating around tap rooms and trying to do something for them. And I suppose that, all of us feel pretty bad actually that that this has ended up the way it has, because it has made them much worse off in the interim period. So it has. So I suppose it's just that I know you're unable to give us any timeframes on it, but our whole economy is starting to open up again. We're hoping that our tourism economy is opening up again. Is there any idea, will this be sorted before that sort of summer period when they would be hoping to have that tourism coming through their doors and being able to then offer them what the committee had originally wanted them to have? And then also as well, I know you'd said that you have been meeting with them. What response have you been getting from the local producers around this? And also, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have everything in front of me, and because I've only one screen here, I can't look things up at the moment. Because of using this to try the meeting. Before we made these changes, they were able to apply for the likes of occasional licenses and stuff like that through. Whether that was through other license holders or whatever, I can't actually remember the actualities of it. They're still unable to do that, though, aren't they? I mean, the only thing they can do is the sample, the piece at the moment. Is that correct? And correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, in terms of the timing, say section 10 itself will be included in the commencement order. The commencement order is going to be made today, hopefully, and that is for commencement on the 6th of April. So there is a process that needs to be followed. There is a court process, but in theory, and obviously you're looking at court dates and things like that. The second week in May could see the first local producers be able to sell themselves on an off sales basis. The second part in terms of section 11 and getting that part sorted ASAP, because you're dealing with the court rules need to go through the Justice Committee before they can go to the Office of Lady Chief Justice and to the Court Rules Committee. So, I mean, speaking with officials, provided time could be found within the DOJ committee timescale to consider and to approve the SL1 that needs to go to them in advance of the pre-election period, then in theory it could be done and it could be in place by the summertime.
Okay, that's
and that was part of the discussions that I had with the courts officials and with the legal advisor and the secretariat this morning. So we will work on the basis that yes, it will be in place by then, provided everything else falls into line along that time. In terms of the response, I think there's disappointment that obviously it won't come in at the same time, but it didn't seem to be there. I didn't receive any response to that comment at the time during the meeting with them in early January. As I say, we've had different phone calls and emails from solicitors and from independent producers, and they have ranged, that they're not just the breweries, they've been the distilleries as well. Again, disappointed that it's not going to take place, but the message I was getting was that, provided they got their original license, they would be ready then whenever Section 11 was available to them, and that they would be then progressing that as soon as that was available. The occasional licenses, there's nothing in Section 10 that prohibits them from being able to apply for, from their premises being able to be used for an occasional license. Section 11 does have that prohibition, but obviously that hasn't come in yet. The occasional licenses, it's a court-based process, and it's a judicial decision, so they have to follow all the same process. So in terms of any issues they're having now, it's not really something that officials could comment on, as it is a decision for the courts.
No, look, that's good to get that cleared up, Carol, because there's just misinformation out there. So until, as you say, Section 11 comes in, they can still operate with the occasional license if they so wish to do so. And I know that you have acted pretty swiftly on this to try and bring about changes. And I think that sort of time frame that you've put out there is positive, and that's good. I was just dreading you saying something like, "Oh, it'll be Christmas before we get this sorted," but obviously it's not too far away. So that's all good news. Members, if anybody wants to ask a question, can they please raise their hands? I only have one person who wants to come in, and that's Mark. So if we could bring Mark in, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to Carol and Liam for that, and Chair, and you're all happy there about the new timeline. But if I pick Martin or Carol up right, that was in theory it could be done. It could be done by then, and we know lots of things can be done in theory, but when it comes to practice, this place isn't great at getting things done quickly. I would commend the officials for their work on trying to get this workaround. I wonder, as a committee, could we maybe make some sort of contact with the Justice Committee to emphasise the importance or urgency with which they should deal with this matter when it does come to them? And I'm sure they've, same as ourselves, with the end of mandate, lots of stuff coming thick and fast, and they might not actually realise, or officials and support for that committee might not realise the import of this particular piece. So I think we should make them aware of that. Now, I've been hearing from people within the industry who had heard murmurings about this some time ago, and then the murmurings became rumblings, and there was a lot of discontent. I'm sure you have heard it loud and clear, Carl and Liam, and given the initial resistance, I suppose, of the department and the minister to this particular amendment, there was a suspicion, and it was hard to allay. I did my best to do so, I can assure you, that this wasn't more than an unfortunate oversight, and I don't think that was helped much by, like, I think when John Blair was asked a question in the chamber about it recently, the minister kind of shrugged her shoulders and says, well, it wasn't my amendment. It doesn't matter who makes the amendment whenever the Assembly expresses a will to do something, that the support should be there in place to make it happen. This is extremely technical, as you've outlined, Carl. I wonder could we get that in writing? I was trying to scribble as you were going through the stuff there, but there's a lot to keep up with. But like I say, it's important that we maintain focus now and get this through as early as possible. The other stuff, you think 6th of April commencement date is possible, did you say, Carl, for the samples or the tours?
Yeah, commencement order is going to be, well, if it's not made today, it'll be Monday. It's just a process sort of thing at this stage, but that's the commencement date is the 6th of April for phase 2.
That's great too, because I do know businesses that have invested quite a bit in that and weren't sure how interrelated the two aspects were. But no, it's good news if we can get it sorted, and hopefully we can get it sorted soon, because I joked about it at, I think, second stage in the chamber, but you can see the headlines around our inability to organise a certain function in a brewery, and it's just it's so ridiculous, but true. Okay, thank you.
Chair, could I maybe just respond to Mark's comments about the department, a department's approach to fixing this amendment? Mark's quite right. The department and the minister originally opposed the amendment, which was formulated by the committee. But as soon as it was passed at the consideration stage, the department worked with OLC to identify any drafting errors in the amendment, and we actually put down 4 amendments to the further consideration stage to help make sure that the amendment worked in the way that both the committee and the Assembly generally wanted it to work. So there was absolutely no attempt by the department to in any way sabotage it, and I really want to emphasise that. I mean, and we've gone out of our way to work very closely with Justice and the Court Service ever since this technical issue was identified. It's a very small technical issue, but it did mean that the applications could not proceed, and the difficulty was missed by everybody who looked at the legislation. So it was very unfortunate, and I understand the disappointment out there, but I can assure the members of the committee that we are doing all we can to fix it, and there was absolutely no attempt in any way to delay.
Oh, I accept that entirely. It's very concerning, though. It is just a very small oversight that can have a very big detrimental impact, and it panics me outside of this legislation that the liquor licence and stuff, the amount of legislation we've been dealing with as a committee, there's been an avalanche of it, and amendments coming from left, right and centre have been passed, and I think we're in for a rocky ride next mandate, if there is one.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for that. No other member has indicated they want to ask anything further on that. I suppose for many of the other members on the committee, they weren't in the committee whenever we were deliberating this bill, which again, as I said, seemed like forever we went through this. Look, thank you very much. I think then as a committee, if members are agreed, then we will write to our colleagues in the Justice Committee just to impress upon them the need to expedite this as soon as they receive it. But thank you, Liam, and thank you, Carol, for your time with us today.
Chair, can I just advise as well, there was a written update provided, Mark had asked there, just in terms of scribbling down notes quickly. It is a technical detail, but I think that was issued last Tuesday, so it should be, if you check with the clerk, it should be in your packs there somewhere.
It is in your packs. No, that's fine. No, thank you, Carol. Sorry, Mark has his hand raised again. Mark, sorry, bring Mark in. Or is it gone? No, his hand. Oh, it hands up. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I had read the written brief, but whenever you were given it there, Carl, it sounded even more technical than when I'd been reading it. I don't know, was there additional stuff there?
No, that's grand. If there's anything else, if you do want it sort of broken down even further, just let us know, and I can send a quick email even across just that sets it all out.
Okay, that'll do. Thanks, Mark. All right, again, thank you, Liam. Thank you, Carol, for your time today.
Thank you. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Okay, members, just before we move on to agenda item 7, I think we need to take a short break. I need to go and print off a new chair's brief, an updated chair's brief, and I think it'll allow members to read through that email as well that came through from Housing Rights before and I don't actually think our officials are in attendance yet because we are running a wee bit early. So we are. But so members, if I could say what time is it now, even if we could take until 10:40, and that allows me time to have a chat with the committee clerk as well offline. So members will resume back at 10:40. Thank you. Again, I don't know if we are or not. Not to me. We are indeed. Okay, members, welcome back. So I've just managed to get my updated brief and have a wee quick word with Janice. So thank you for that. Members, we're going to move then on to agenda item 7. Which is the departmental briefing on the notice to quit consultation. Members, you'll find the briefing paper at page 42 of your packs. So can I then welcome to the meeting David Polly, Rhonda McFall and Eilish O'Neill. So all very welcome today. It only seems like yesterday that we saw you, David. So
Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to go ahead then and brief the committee? That would be good.
Okay. So as members know, the 2006 Private Tenancies Order sets out a system of notices to quit, and these are the same for tenants and landlords. And for the first 5 years of a tenancy, the notice is 4 weeks. For tenancies 5 to 10 years, it's 8 weeks, and for tenancies over 10 years, it's 12 weeks. And then in 2020, the Assembly introduced the coronavirus emergency legislation, which lengthened all of those notice periods, but only for landlords having to give to tenants to 12 weeks. And the notice periods for tenants given landlords stayed the same. So this was a new principle that landlord and tenant notice periods didn't have to match. So the Private Tenancies Bill, as we had drafted and laid at the Assembly, would have amended the notice to quit period that a landlord is required to give a tenant to 8 weeks for tenancies longer than 12 months and up to 10 years. But it also made the distinction between landlord and tenants notice periods, making this a permanent feature of our tenancy law. So the Minister had said that she considered 8 weeks too short a time for a tenant to find a new home. But however, the Department acknowledges that longer notice periods require exemptions in certain circumstances where shorter notice would be reasonable. So the bill therefore also included a power to make regulations to lengthen the notices, but taking into account exemptions of this. So the bill, if you remember, talks about different types of cases. As members will know then, the bill was amended yesterday, and the amendment retains the fundamental features of longer notices than the default ones, increasing with the length of tenancy, but it does not include exemptions. So the Minister was keen to start work on revised exemptions and notice periods as quickly as possible and asked us to start the policy process. So the first step of that is to carry out research and to do public consultation on options. So the department got the Chartered Institute for Housing, and we commissioned them to provide up-to-date research on the issue of notices to quit, and that included a public consultation. So the consultation covered some of those principles I've discussed: different notices for landlords and tenants, longer notices for longer tenancies, exemptions, and the length of notices. It opened on the 1st of December and closed on the 25th of January. And we have now published the research that CIH did, and we've published the results of the consultation. During the consultation, 54 stakeholders responded to the consultation in writing, and 15 stakeholders attended 2 consultation events that were facilitated by CIH. I'm going to hand over to Rhonda for more detail here. So as introduced, I'm accompanied by Rhonda McFall, who works in the Private Tenancies team, and Eilish, who's the committee will know, who also works in the Private Tenancies team. So Rhonda's going to go through each of the consultation questions and talk about the responses we get. And we might want to take questions after each question and work through them that way. So Rhonda.
Okay, David, thank you. And good morning, Chair, and good morning, Committee. So as David said, I'll go through its consultation questions. So the first consultation question was, do you agree that the length of notice to quit for landlord and tenants should be different. There was 59% of respondents agreed that the length of notice to quit should be different. The majority of those responding on behalf of an organisation or as an individual with an interest from a tenant perspective agreed that the length of notices to quit should be different for landlords and tenants. In contrast, the majority of individuals with an interest from a landlord perspective did not agree. The government response to the consultation question then was that the Private Tenancies Bill does introduce different notices to quit for landlords and tenants. And I'm happy to take any questions about that item before we move on.
Hold on, I'm unable to open up my other screen, so I only have the screen of you here in front of me, so I can't look at all the detail here. I don't know whether this is the best way to do it or not, because it means then having to bring members in and out. But I know members, if you have any questions on what Rhonda has just said there around question 1, if you can let me know. I know, Andy, you have your hand up. If I'll bring in Andy first, if it's on question 1.
Sure, I don't have any questions at this stage. I tried to get in at the beginning just to declare an interest as a private sector landlord.
Not a bother. Thanks, Andy, for that. That's okay. All right. Look, I'll let you carry on then, Rhonda, on to the next question. Sorry, Paul Free has his hand up. Bring Paul in.
Just to also declare an interest as an owner of a rented property, just to keep things right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, Chair, thank you. So moving on to the next consultation question then. Do you agree that notices to quit should vary depending on the length of tenancies? And 72% of respondents agreed. The majority of respondent types agreeing that notice to quit should vary depending on the length of tenancy supported that position. Respondents' views varied as to what the notice period should be depending on the length of tenancy in question. There was an understanding that the longer a tenancy, the more disruption caused by serving notice to individuals or families. Respondents cited distinct issues for long-term tenants, particularly those with children still in school, and the disruption caused to their education and childcare needs. And the government response to that consultation question was that the bill does contain notice to quit requirements based on the length of tenancy. And again, happy to take any questions on that issue.
Nobody has their hands raised that they want to ask a question on that issue. And I suppose just to say that was something that the committee did talk about during their deliberations. So I have no surprises there that was the response to that. No, so go ahead, Rhonda.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the next consultation question then, do you agree that the length of notice for shorter term tenancies up to 12 months should remain at 4 weeks? And if no, what length do you think it should be? And what information can you provide in support of this? 64% of respondents agreed that this should remain at 4 weeks. While opinions were split for organisations and those responding as individuals with an interest from a tenant perspective, the majority of individuals with an interest from landlord perspective agreed that the length of notice for shorter term tenancies up to 12 months should remain at 4 weeks. However, many respondents noted that regardless of the length of tenancy, landlords should nonetheless have to provide either an 8 or 12-week notice period to tenants to reflect the difficulty in securing accommodation in the private rented sector, therefore treating these tenants equally to those living in a property longer than 12 months. And the government response to that particular question was that for tenancies up to 12 months, the notice to quit remains at 4 weeks in the new bill. And again, happy to take any comments at this stage.
Again, Rhonda, no hands have been raised to ask questions. Do you want to carry on?
No problem, thank you, Chair. So the next one then was, what do you think the notice to quit period that a landlord will be required to give a tenant should be where the tenancy is between 12 months and 10 years in length? 38% said 12 weeks, 28% of respondents said 8 weeks, 10% said 6 months. There were others ranging between 4 or 8 weeks. One example of tiering notice to quit was supplied. and the example was 4 weeks at 0 to 1 year, 6 weeks at 1 to 3 years, 8 weeks at 3 to 5 years, and 12 weeks at 5 to 10 years. Of those respondents who supported the 12-week notice to quit period, a number said they supported this view as it seemed like a good balance between the current position and other options, such as extending it to 6 months. It was also noted that the 12-week notice period has been tried and tested as a result of the temporary extension of the notice to quit period, which was introduced through the implementation of the Private Tenancies Coronavirus Modification Act, Northern Ireland 2020. One respondent cited the risk of disincentivising landlords by extending the notice to quit period beyond 8 weeks. They added that in the context of changing notice periods, the department should consider what incentives they can offer landlords to encourage more long-term tenancies. So the government response was that in Clause 11 of the Private Tenancies Bill, as drafted and prior to yesterday's debate, had included provisions for a notice to quit period of 8 weeks for tenancies from 12 months up to 10 years and 12 weeks for tenancies over 10 years. Given the diversity of opinions expressed in the consultation, the department would have taken forward further work and consider the need for any change by further consultation legislation. In particular, taking into account the need for exemptions, which were covered in the next part of the consultation. So again, happy at this stage if you'd like to discuss that item.
No hands have been raised. I suppose it's just a bit strange discussing a lot of this stuff given what happened yesterday.
That's true.
So yeah, and I mean we know what we know, and you will know that there has been a lot of comment after that from various housing providers and the third sector with major concern around some of these amendments that were agreed yesterday. But I'd say we'll have that discussion probably at the end on step way forward and next steps and how we address all of that. But sorry, Paul has his hand raised on this issue. Paul,
just on the exemption piece and asking that question within, and just allow me to get this back up again. Bear with me. So the question was, do you think that there should be exemptions to this notice period? Did the, and again, excuse my ignorance, I should know this, but did the consultation offer examples of exemptions? Because that could affect the answers to the question with regards, do you think that there should be exemptions to this notice period? If people are asking this, and I know that the people responding to this will be experts, but you can see how a question answers can be skewed by giving examples of exemptions, whereas there may be a case where exemptions don't come into someone's head in any given time of response.
Certainly, Paul, yes, that's actually the next consultation question. So the question as asked was, do you think there should be exemptions to this notice period? And if yes, what should those exemptions be? So
yes, yeah, I get that. And that's where I'm at. So I'm probably ahead of the game here, preempting getting my hand in. But the answer, the question I ask is, did you provide examples of exemptions?
No, the question as asked was, if yes, what should those exemptions be? So it was left to the respondents to make suggestions for exemptions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. All right, Rhonda.
Okay, Chair, thank you. So that question then we've moved on to. So 69% of respondents thought that exemptions should apply to this notice period. Suggestions for exemptions included antisocial behaviour, criminal behaviour, rent arrears, with respondents suggesting periods of 4 weeks, 8 weeks, or 6 months, fleeing domestic violence, and death of a tenant, where time was perhaps required to be longer to clear belongings from the property. So the government response, there is a strong support for exemptions to be linked to the previous question. However, work is needed to develop a detailed policy intervention with further engagement with stakeholders. Different timescales would apply to different exemptions. and also other exemptions would have to be explored. Again, clause 11 of the drafted Private Tenancies Bill had included provision to enable this approach. However, yesterday's vote has changed this. And again, I'm happy to take any questions on that particular item.
And I suppose, thanks for that, Rhonda. That probably is one of the main questions that certainly that I would want to ask is around the exemptions. And I know you'd said there about work is needed to develop those exemptions, and absolutely understand that. There has to be work done because there will be other exemptions that some of us will not have thought of, that people could give examples of as to why they needed or why a landlord needed to give notice in an earlier date, or whether or a tenant, either or. And I think there were different examples given in the chamber yesterday. But that list is, it's infinite. There could be many other things that, unless you actually speak to someone who's had to get out of their home on in a timely manner, or a landlord that's had to give notice on a timely manner for various reasons. So just when it comes to that work that's needed to develop, that is going to take time. So how is that going to correspond or correlate with the amendment that was passed yesterday in the Assembly around these notice to quit timeframes? Can one come in without the other being in place? I suppose it's just asking that question, maybe.
Yeah, Chair, that's a good question. So yesterday you'll also have noticed that there were two other amendments that the department had proposed, which were designed to commence the new notices to quit at the same time as the coronavirus notices to quit ended, or as soon as possible after, depending exactly when we got royal assent. So if we got royal assent before the 4th, they would have commenced them on the 5th, because the last day of those is the 4th of May. And the minister didn't move those for that reason, that we would have been concerned about putting the new length notices to quit that were agreed in that amendment into place before we had exemptions. That would have been problematic. The minister has asked us to look if we can do some sort of transitional provision to come in on the 5th of May. So obviously, this all happened yesterday. Yeah. So we're going, because at the minute the default position then is that on the 5th of May, it goes back down to 4 weeks for anyone who's been in a tenancy for less than 10 years, from 12 weeks. And although the Assembly voted for considerably longer notices to quit, it will take us a while to work that out. It might we had wanted to sort of discuss this a bit. I mean, when you say antisocial behaviour, what exactly does that mean? What's the burden of proof? What's the level of evidence you need? One thing which did come up in this that we hadn't thought of before was the need for exemptions to tenants' notices to quit. That there might be particular reasons why a tenant wants to get out sooner. So one that was actually raised in the consultation was the death of a tenant, and if they were in a long notice, do they really need to stay there for 12 weeks, or whatever it is in the bill, and things like that need thought through too. Some of the other ones, Scotland has different. I think it has about 16 different scenarios. Ireland has less, but there are include things like higher arrears of rent or arrears of rent. We would need to think through, what do we mean by a lot of arrears of rent? What processes would you expect landlords to go through to demonstrate they've actually tried to sort that out before they start serving eviction notices? Eilish, you've done a bit more thinking about this,
yeah, well, that one's particularly complicated, I suppose, because we don't have anything in the private tenancies order at the minute which says you're in arrears, technically what arrears of rent looks like. At the moment, if a tenant falls into arrears and the landlord wants to take possession of the property, they have to go to court to get a possession order. They have to demonstrate that there's arrears and the tenant hasn't made any effort to pay those arrears. So for us to try now and set out legally, what does it mean when you're in arrears? Because does it mean part arrears where somebody hasn't paid all of their rent? Does it mean 1 month? Does it mean 2 months? At what stage does this become an issue where a landlord will serve a notice to quit? And there could potentially be unintended consequences where we stipulate something which then means a landlord, after 1 month's rent is missed, gives a tenant a notice to quit, a shorter notice to quit a property. So it's just it could potentially be a minefield, so we just need to be very, very careful as we take this piece of work forward. Rent arrears worries me, and the antisocial behaviour as well, because one person's antisocial behaviour is another person's gathering with a few friends in a garden. So How do you demonstrate? Could it be used? Could it be abuse? Saying that there'd been a report of antisocial behaviour. So and David mentioned the burden of proof on that. So there would be a lot of work. And Minister did say that the amendment as it stands should not be commenced with royal assent because there aren't any exemptions in there. And that's something that we then have to take away and look at. Otherwise, the bill, there's a competence issue in relation to the bill with the amendment as it stands, and that's a piece of work that we're starting to look at today.
So you're going to look at first, well, I suppose we need to look at that transitional provision as you had termed it, David. I know that this is also, there's an issue around this when we look at the other amendment that was made yesterday as well around the rents freeze, because certainly then after speaking to various people yesterday, there's now a concern because we know the private rented sector is in very, very high demand. We know from hearing from our constituents who have, I know I had one just last week, a young working couple who have just cannot even get into the rented sector because they're in such high debt, especially in and around the Belfast area in particular here. And, you know, if a landlord is being told they have to reduce rents and then freeze them, we will have people made homeless because of that as well, and in order for them to get around that loophole. So we are going to see, so this then knocks on to with the notice to quit then, if someone's been in their property. So, I mean, I would imagine that there are already landlords who have been listening in, certainly to yesterday and decisions that have been made. And I know from speaking to the third sector, there are major concerns now around this. On you know, people being evicted before this notice to quit period comes in order for landlords to protect their rents. So it all falls, it's intertwined. It is, and I suppose that's why some sort of transitional provision is paramount. So I have major concerns around all of this. Going forward. I know there's a few members want to ask a couple of questions of Paul, and then I have Andy, so I'm going to bring Paul in first. Paul? Can you bring Paul in?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, sorry. Some of my questions have been alluded to with regards to the contributions there from the officials around about antisocial behaviour. Not all antisocial behaviour is criminal activity or criminal behaviour, and even if it was, you have to prove it in a court of law. So there's massive issues here. The issue around rent arrears. I do believe in the principle that if you're in arrears of rent, then your rights should diminish. But again, at this present time, a landlord has to go to court with regards to an eviction on those grounds. So there are massive issues here that will extend into a longer period of time than the actual notice to quit, I would imagine. So I can see massive issues here that will distort the relationship, not only the market, but the relationship between tenant and private landlord. And it could work out that the balance isn't there, and it could strike a real discord against tenants. So, you know, how do you define antisocial behaviour and the level that justifies exemption is my first question. I'll leave it there. Just, Chair, if I can, I'll come in with further questions once that's answered.
Okay. I think the answer to that is carefully, with a lot of consultation, and because you don't, as you say, it's the sort of thing you have to get right. It's quite a fine judgment. Ultimately, we would need to define it well enough so that a landlord would be sure that they met the burden of proof, so that if they had to go to a court, the judge would actually be able to make a decision on it. I mean, that is the sort of thing you're talking about. You know, everyone would need to know where they stand, but further than that, it would need to be defined, because it might end up in front of a judge. So
let me throw a scenario at you, David. Thank you. So there's a relationship breakdown between two households where they row and fight every night. One's as bad as the other, but what it's doing is upsetting the whole neighbourhood. that can be classed as antisocial behaviour and it's annoyance to all the other neighbours. So is something like that going to be covered in an exemption?
If you don't mind, I'm not really going to be able to answer questions like that at this point, because the point that we wanted to make is that this is the sort of thing we need to do carefully and think about very, very carefully. I mean, there are other places have tried to do this. I've looked at what they have in Scotland. The overwhelming point is that quite how detailed it is and how much fine tuning they've done since they brought it in and how much tweaking they've done to it. So it's not easy and it'll take a while.
And I think the very question that you've asked, Mr. Free, around this particular case sort of demonstrates how difficult it is. And equally, you could have a scenario where you have two households where one household is as bad as the other, but one's a householder, they own their property, the other is a private tenant, but the private tenant is the person who could ultimately lose their home because of a dispute where one party has all the power because they're paying a mortgage or they own the property outright. And sometimes it's going to be extremely complicated to do this.
So do you is there a fear or concern that this could affect security of tenure and keep people below a certain threshold of time with regards to tenure? And is that something you're actively looking at by amendment? And I suppose my final question, Chair, is this: are we sure, notwithstanding any decision by the Assembly, are the officials convinced that we're now in the position where we can actually do this in the detailed fashion that it needs through secondary legislation? Or are we looking at a brand new phase 2 with primary legislation to basically fix this? I'll not ask you to comment on the fixing bit. That's my opinion. But are we still convinced that we can do this through regulation?
I mean, my answer to that, I suppose, is that you would have to do it through regulation. So what you do is a primary power that allows you to make it, and that we wouldn't want to commence it. We wouldn't be able to commence it until we've done that. And it would be draft affirmative as well. So that's the other thing. I think we haven't made that point yet, that it would be draft affirmative. So we'll be coming back to the Assembly and talking to the committee, I imagine quite a lot, before we even get in front of the Assembly to say, is this, are you, you told us you wanted longer notices to quit with exemptions. Here are the exemptions we're proposing. Is this something you, as democratically elected members, because we're not, we're civil servants, is this what you would be happy with? And then we would put it in place. Also, by doing regulations, I suppose it would allow you to review it more frequently. But also, regulations require primary powers.
Yeah, of course.
But I suppose for us, sorry, there, David. I suppose for us, as we are, as of today, in relation to clause 11, sort of, now back to the drawing board and looking at what was passed in the Assembly yesterday and what it is we need to look at and what we need to consult with the OLC on, with our departmental solicitor, what can be done within the time frame so that we have something then to bring to Minister and then to bring back to the Assembly. So yesterday's vote in relation to the two amendments that were passed mean that we are now back in relation to those, to looking at issues from a pretty basic level.
So when with this one, the member was Ciara Ferguson. So I don't know if she's here today. I know she's on the committee, and I can only see two of you at the minute. But she said that she was willing to work with the department officials to tweak this, to do whatever it took to bring it back to get it into competence. And our minister undertook to do that. So we'll be following that up. And then that would then go to further consideration stage. Now, when it comes to these things, we had certificate of competence with the bill as laid. So at the minute, we're going to go and talk to our advisors and see what needs to be done, and then talk to the member and talk to the minister, and then see what we can bring forward for the consideration stage. But obviously, there's a risk, because it hasn't been signed off by a lawyer yet.
Well, on the issue around security of tenure leading up to any given point, are we worried that this will now jolt the the market and the relationship between tenant and landlord in the interim period?
Any change always has the potential to have unintended consequences.
Yeah, and just on the competence of the bill, how concerned are you about the reduction in that competence? Can you give us a percentage? Like if
the minister.
If it's 100% out of competency now, so be it. You know, it'll just have to be fixed. You know, so are we sure that we are now in a position of jeopardy?
Well, the minister was quite clear about that the two amendments that were passed as drafted meant the bill was at risk of competence. You can't really know until you get to the end of the process. But the existence of the further consideration stage is to refine legislation to get it back in. I think there was an acceptance at the Assembly yesterday about the notice to quit, that a longer notice to quit needed exemptions. Actually, the amendment that was made, it talked about tiers, that there would be more of them. I know the committee talked about that, and during the debate there was quite a bit of agreement that we only have 3 tiers in our bill and maybe there should be more, that we were only talking about 8 weeks notice to quit, and there was an acceptance in a lot of the debate that was quite short. And although we had intended to do it in time using the regulations, that maybe members wanted that a bit quicker. So I don't want to sound too hopeful, but I can see a path with that one at least. But it is on the basis
we
that
do
it's
have
not
issues
going to start on the 5th of May.
But there are issues with time, given the tight time scale. There are challenges presented to officials because of
there's not a lot of time between the stages.
That's the point I was going to make also with regards to the time between further consideration stage and the one we've just had. Just you put me onto another question now, David, which I was going to ask later on. And that was the time durations that are now within the bill, which is 7.5 months and 8.5 months. And how do you think that will work in practice with regards to a notice to quit halfway through months? I know it's the case down in the Republic. I suppose, have you any knowledge of how that actually works down south and the practicalities of paying what is basically a half month's rent? And then I'll leave it there.
This was proposed quite late, but the Irish tenancy legislation has been amended quite a lot recently, and then it was amended further because of coronavirus, and there was all sorts of interim things were put in place. My understanding is it's considered quite complex. It had been more or less the same for quite a long time, and it has now been amended quite a lot of ways quite quickly. And so I don't know if it's what the amendments are cumulatively, which is causing the confusion, or the fact that there's just been so many of them and they've all happened so recently. And when that happens as well, you get announcements about things that haven't happened yet, and then you get announcement before the last thing comes in and things like that. So it could just be the pace of change. And that was a point that came up a couple of times in various consultations recently from landlords. It's not that more regulation is necessarily a bad thing, but it's, if there's a constant change in picture, it can be hard for especially people who, they only have 1 or 2 houses, they have another job, it's not their profession. It can be hard to keep up.
So final question, Chair. So is there anywhere in the world where the principle of a multi-tiered system for notice to quit is the burden all on the landlord, whereas the tenant isn't so multi-tiered? Because at the minute that's what the bill looks like. So you have multi-tiers for landlords, but you've only basically the 2 tiers for tenants. And is that a position that we can tolerate?
I only know the situation in a few off the top of my head because I haven't really thought through this. But this is something that we need to look at, because in general terms, this is in human rights law terms, the lawyers would talk about balance. And one of the things which gives balance is if tenants get more protection, and therefore there's more risk put on the landlords, that maybe landlords should have more protection and more risk goes with the tenants.
The CIH research. sorry, David, the CIH research piece, which predated the consultation exercise, sort of set out, because we asked them to look at what happens in other jurisdictions in other parts of the world, and it sets out what happens from Canada to Australia to other parts of the UK to Northern Ireland. And I suppose just one point that I wanted to make is that over 90%, almost 95% of tenancies end with the tenant given a notice to quit to the landlord, because their circumstances change. They're buying a house, they get a social home on the occasion when social home's available, and they find more suitable accommodation. So we know that the vast majority of tenancies end with the tenant given the notice to quit. So it's a much smaller percentage of, I think, David, you'd mentioned a figure earlier, if for every 20 tenants who give a notice to quit, there's one landlord who gives a notice to quit. So I suppose that's something that we try to balance out as well. And for those tenants in receipt of benefit, they need to give a shorter notice to quit if they find someone more suitable, because they can't pay rent for two properties out of their housing benefit or the housing element of their universal credit, because the money just isn't there. So to put an extra burden on them to give a longer notice to quit period, at the same time they have to accept and maybe start paying for a new tenancy in order to secure that accommodation, could put quite a burden on them. So that was something that during the debate, Minister did articulate yesterday, that the 4 weeks notice to quit for a tenant seemed proportionate in order to help the majority of tenants. But you're right. I mean, when we have the conversations with our legal people later, they may well say, no, there has to be some more of a balance introduced here. But we just don't know, because we haven't had the opportunity to have those further discussions with them as yet.
I understand. Thanks very much for your answers, Eilish and David. Thank you.
Okay, I just remind members, if they want to ask any questions around this exemption part, to put their hands up. There's nobody with their hands up at the minute. Just if I go back then to the exemptions, you might have said it earlier. You had said then that, what was it, that further work is needed to develop this, and then that will include engagement with stakeholders. I mean, that's not going to be a quick process. So I mean, it's coming to the next mandate. It's the next committee for communities that will be debating this. It will not be this committee for communities. So it's just the time frame on that. And then just back to this transitional provision, because that concerns me because of the Coronavirus Act, and whenever that runs out, did you say it was, David, the 4th of May? That transitional provision, I assume that work is now, full steam ahead to try and bring that into play.
Yeah. It's part of the discussions that we have to have with our advisors. I mean, at the position, you understand we're in the position we're in, is that, we know the questions we want to ask them, we know what we want. I don't think, I haven't heard a single person say that we want to go back to where we were on the 5th of May.
No, absolutely. And I mean, the committee are, I mean, we are in support of a tiered approach. Absolutely. That was something that was debated within the committee. So we're not against it. We're absolutely in favour of it, but we just would have preferred to have seen something that was much more workable than what we have at the moment. There's no other questions around this part to do with the exemptions. So Rhonda, I'm going to pass back over to you again.
That's grand, Chair, thank you. And we're moving on then to the last question in the consultation, which concerned houses of multiple occupation. Do you think the length of notice to quit for those tenants living in an HMO or for exemptions to the notice to quit should be different from that of other tenants in the private rented sector? And if so, in what way? 88% of respondents did not think that the length of notice to quit or exemptions for tenants living in an HMO should be different from that of other tenants living in the private rented sector. Many respondents made clear that HMOs should not be omitted from attempts to strengthen security of tenure for those living in the private rented sector, and that tenants living in an HMO property should therefore receive the same legislative protections. There was a recognition that often tenants living in HMO properties prefer the flexibility of shorter tenancies provide, such as students or young professionals. And the government response then to that question was that the department recognises the needs of tenants and landlords and that legislation should apply to all types of private rented sector rental accommodation. Notice to quit in the draft Tenancies Bill applies to those in the private rented sector, and the department will continue to monitor it. And that's the last question, Chair. Then if there's any questions on that item.
No, I don't see anybody with their hands up on that item, and I suppose it makes sense, absolutely, that HMOs should fall under the same legislation as any other rental property. I remember well the HMO bill when I sat in the old DSD committee a number of years ago, and just, yeah, that was just a complete nightmare, that bill as well, so it was. So no, there's no further questions there. I suppose, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here on generally on what happened yesterday. I know there may be, I don't know, David, if you're up for a few more questions just on generalities around what happened yesterday. I know you're here to brief us on this, on the notice to quit, but it wouldn't be like us to take advantage of you while you're here. So, and you, of course,
Chair, bearing in mind that it happened yesterday and we're still trying to work out exactly what the position is.
I know, and I suppose probably the only other issue then is the rent freeze, and I know some members, were a bit vexed over that because we were told all along that we couldn't, we didn't have any powers to look at rents in this part of the bill, that would be in the next bill. So, and I know there are concerns around that, certainly. Coming from, as I said earlier, from other various agencies that are really quite concerned now, that some members or some people, but some tenants will file themselves homeless. So they will, in order to start off a new contract with someone. So therefore they'll not fall into this. So it's just that is a real worry and a real concern that has been brought forward by various people. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the email. I know it was only sent to members earlier from Housing Rights around both of those clauses. So I don't know if members have any further questions that they want to ask. On anything. Ciara, sorry, bring in Ciara, please.
No, I just want to reiterate with regards to David, I'm very keen to work closely with the officials with regards to my amendment that I put forward, obviously, and obviously looking at the transitional stage as well to keep the bill competent. So just to reassure David and the officials, I'm keen to work quite closely with you over the next few weeks. I'm on that issue, so thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ciara. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Paul Frey has his hand raised, and then Mark Durkin. So I'll bring Paul in first.
Chair, so David, what's to stop a landlord now increasing rents by 10% or even maybe 20% while they're at it?
Do you mean right now?
Yes, right now. To this week.
Yeah, at the minute, there's no controls over how often or by how much a landlord can increase anyone's rent in a private tenancy. Although obviously they might be in a contract. Sorry, that's unless they're in a contract already.
Right. Okay. So a contract's usually what, every hour is that renewed, or is that usually over a wider period? What I'm trying to establish, is the unintended consequences and how deep they could go in this regard to this one amendment. This amendment alarms me. Let's call it as it is. I think it will distort the market. This is with regards to the 10% decrease. I get cut out there, Chair, so I didn't hear your contribution there.
Well, just on that, is that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but is there not a 6-month clause in place on that amendment that the 10%?
Yeah, the amendment
was on the previous.
The amendment was an average over the previous 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So if a landlord was wanting to act, you'd need to act now. With regards to any royal assent that you guys would get and any commencement orders you would get to actually try and implement that new clause.
The amendment at the minute does say, I'm not sure this would necessarily make a terrible lot of difference, because the amendment says that it will come in royal assent. Now we would need to look at that and see what what we did about that. But if it came in at Royal Assent, that would probably be towards the end of May, and it'll be over the average. It will be the average over the 6 months previously.
I suppose because the clause as written says the average of the 6 months before Royal Assent is granted, and if Royal Assent comes as we would have hoped for the bill around May time, you would think that window had passed. I suppose an unintended consequence of this could be where, and I think Chair, you mentioned this earlier, where the tenancy ends and then there's a new tenancy agreement with a contract put in place, because there's the potential here where you have a contract that's been signed and agreed by both parties and amount has been agreed. What would the amendment do to an existing contract, and where you've had people who've been in properties for a number of years where their rent hasn't been raised by a landlord? How would that impact on a landlord then if there's to be a decrease? So there's lots and lots of unintended consequences that need to be thought out, and you know, because you did ask us at committee what could be done about rent. Minister was very clear. She's committed to looking at fair and affordable rents right across the social and the private rented sector, and she had instructed us as officials to start looking at that in phase 2 in a lot more detail. But this has put us in a different position than the one we were in before yesterday.
I think this is possibly this is a different model than Ireland and Scotland both have models of rent control. But this is a different thing. You know, this is a rent cut.
Yeah. So what's to stop a landlord now going to a tenant and saying, okay, you're on 5, you pay me 530. I'm now going to tell everyone that you now pay 590, but you keep paying me the 530. That's a real possibility.
This is a general point. Is that I would expect. I mean, your basic point is that a lot of landlords are going to try and circumvent it, and as drafted, it is possibly quite easy to circumvent. And the other thing is as drafted, there's no penalty to a landlord who tries to circumvent it or does circumvent it. And the other thing about rent control is you have to bear in mind is that quite often tenants are party to the circumvention because they want a house.
Yep. Yeah.
So they're in places that have rent control. It's not at all uncommon for landlords and tenants to be complicit together in circumventing the laws, because that is the way the tenant gets the house over the other 9 people in the queue outside the door for it.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the big issues with Ireland's model, is that it's widely circumvented by tenants as well as landlords.
It could be circumvented for house. Sorry, Mr. It could be circumvented where in housing benefit cases in particular, because any reduction in the rent where a tenant is in receipt of housing benefit or the housing element of UC, the saving in that doesn't go to the tenant. The saving in that goes to Treasury.
Yes.
Because the reduction in the rent has to be reflected as a change of circumstances in the benefit that's claimed by the tenant. So I suppose that's something that we'd need to give some more attention and thought to, what happens in those particular cases, because as you know, 48, almost 50% of tenants receive some form of assistance with their rent. And where it would be of benefit would be where the rent exceeds the local housing allowance, so the tenants having to make a top up out of their benefit themselves. In that case, certainly there would be more money in their pocket. But for those cases where the rent is at or below the local housing allowance, then the saving would be to Treasury. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with saving taxpayers' money. Let me hasten to add.
Yeah, and I know for sure there's scenarios out there where tenants are getting housing benefit and it's going straight to the landlord, or it was going straight to the landlord, and the tenant might have to top up £10 or £20 a week. A lot of landlords would have foregone that if they had a really good tenant. So because they were getting a regular payment through housing benefit or universal credit, they were getting sure money every month. They would have forgo £10, £20 that the tenant would have to contribute. Nearly in a goodwill gesture, to say, well, look, you're looking after my house. So I can see that being distorted and damaged in that regard. One other question then is, have you guys communicated or done any scoping work on the housing executive and what an equivalent drop in rent in the housing executive or social housing sector would mean for both tenant and housing associations or housing executive?
No, we haven't. But as you know, the Minister announced a rent freeze for the housing executive, but that's the only rents we control. We don't control the rents for housing associations.
Surely if the will of the House was to decrease private tenancies rent by 10%, the housing executive would have to follow suit.
I'm not sure the logic follows. However, I mean, it is worth me pointing out at this point that housing executive rents are far lower than private tenancies, than the rents in the private rental sector, and indeed far lower than normal housing association houses.
Yeah, an able defence there, David. Well done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Just before I bring Mark in, just on that issue as well about the rent freeze, on the private rented sector, we know that a vast amount of people within the private rented sector are people who cannot get on the housing ladder, who are out at work full time, and they rent, especially in and around Belfast. We'll see it because of the house prices and because of getting their deposit together. So this actually will impact on everyone then in the housing rented sector. So you know that young couple or whoever it might be that are saving hard, which is great. And I suppose I need to declare an interest there because my daughter and her partner are private renters while they're saving for their deposit. So they will also get this 10%. So this is not going on based on what we would call need. This is just right across the board. Isn't that correct?
It would apply. I mean, as drafted, it would apply to everyone. And I mean, we were talking about this morning. Actually, I know somebody who works for the UN and rents a house, and the UN pays the rent. And I know what the rent is, and it is at least 3 or 4 times the average rent in Northern Ireland. They would get that money. Well, I suppose maybe the UN would get that money. I don't know. There's doctors who rent and things like that. Yeah,
I worked for the health service for a number of years, and I live actually quite close to White Abbey Hospital. And I remember then, a lot of the houses were rented by nurses and doctors and various people, and it's the same up and around any hospital, around Antrim area, around all of them. There's a lot of private renters because that suits them from moving from hospital to hospital during their career.
Chief executives of multinational companies who've moved here.
Yeah, I could think of all of those private rentals along the Lagan, those seafront or those Lagan front big apartments, penthouse apartments. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I'm going to bring Mark in here as well. Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the team for coming along with for why they came along and for indulging us by staying on the address or answer or try to answer some of our questions or concerns about where the ball lies now. I mean, I am personally frustrated to have raised again and again around the potential to implement some sort of rent control through this legislation and been told again and again that no chance of doing it. Otherwise, I would have had an amendment down. I didn't want to waste my time or the Assembly's by doing that. Now, when we're looking at and all talking about the ridiculousness of the amendment that was passed, we have to also put our hands up and say none of us voted against it. Which was daft. Now, when you consider it, but does this not make? And I know it just happened yesterday, David and Eilish. Surely this takes the bill just to another realm of ridiculousness, and it's way beyond the competence of this bill.
Yeah, I mean we're taking advice on that now to see. I'm not going to pretend it's not just the human rights interactive at human rights and what we might be able to do to amend it at further consideration stage that might bring it back in, what might be possible. But there's other things around the parameters, how much you could amend it, so whether or not those two match up, and then also around the procedures in the House, because I mean none of us are experts in the House's procedures itself as to whether or not there might be other pathways. But our job today is to work through all these things and see where we are.
I think it could have been amended beyond redemption here.
I think that would be a pity.
Oh,
Considering,
it would be a huge thing.
We consider all the work you put into it and the work we put into it, but more to the point, there's 140,000 households or 130,000 households, and all the other protections, carbon monoxide detectors, energy efficiency,
Electrical safety.
rent increases, electrical safety, things like that. We're really behind on some of those things, and we would really want to get those things into place here.
Oh, of course we do, but saying as now, can we? Or does this? I mean, the Minister was clear in the House yesterday as well that, approving this amendment or accepting this amendment would derail the bill. Torpedo, did she say? I can't remember her exact terminology. So if it doesn't, I don't know, was that misleading the House? I know you guys will have to try and work now to try and make this workable, but I just, given the plethora of problems thrown up, and we just got a flavour of them there. Some of the ones like Paula was chatting about there, I hadn't even considered, and that was or you mentioned too, David, that the high end renters hadn't even considered that. But I just don't know how it gets brought back in.
It's certainly a challenge, and it's something that we have meetings set up for the rest of the day to discuss with those people who are experts in competence and our legal experts to look at what can, because I mean the will of the House was that this, and you're right, was that this amendment was carried. So we have to now see if anything can be done to bring it within competence, and if it can't be, then the bill will fall. And if it can be, we have a very short window to try and get back to you in the Assembly with whatever, if anything, can be redrafted for you to consider and vote on again. I mean, this further consideration stage is scheduled for next week. This is now Thursday afternoon, which means it's very tight for us to try and do anything.
Can it be amended out again?
David, you can maybe answer that one.
We aren't the people who know about that. We know about the policy.
We should be.
Yeah.
If there's an MLA around, you can ask them. Sorry, Elise saying is that the amendments for the consideration stage have to be in next week. The further consideration stage itself is the week after.
The week after, but the amendments have to be in for next week.
The amendments have to be in for next week.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I don't think there's anybody else. Oh, sorry, Andy's his hand up. Can we bring Andy in, please?
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly on that point, that latter point there, David, Eilish, on the amendments that may be required, and listening to what you've outlined around the competency issues of Amendment 13 and 15 that creates for the bill, and what you need to consider. Are we at the point where the amendment deadline of 9:30 next Wednesday is unachievable, and that you may have to ask for the further consideration stage to be pushed back?
I mean, if we weren't approaching the end of the mandate, that would be the concern around pushing it back, is that at some point we will run out of time. I mean, obviously, whenever we were always trying to get this bill in before the end of the mandate, and under normal circumstances, you would take longer between the stages anyway. But I mean, that would be the concern around about that approach, which would give us a bit longer to prepare something, but then might bring us back to the very last week.
Yeah, but also given that it's the last amending stage, there's obviously the need to get it right, and no one's in control of the destiny of the House. If one amendment were to be passed, another amendment that was needed that wasn't consequential wasn't passed. So there are so many complexities here that this creates is why we took the approach that we took in relation to these amendments. We wanted to see the notice to quit, as we had articulated at second stage, extended for tenants, but we took on board what the department were saying. This was very complex around exemptions, and there was a need to consider this in a more broader sense. But that's just a point I wanted to put on record. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Any comment from that? Any, David or Eilish? Or no?
No, it's all been very useful to talk. It's been very useful to talk to Phil after yesterday.
No, it has. Yeah, very useful. Look, oh, here, hold on. Paul Free's looking in again. Paul, bring Paul in, please.
I think we should charge the officials for the what's the word I'm looking for? It's left me. I'll come back. Therapy. Yeah, I think we should charge the officials for the therapy session that we have given them today. It's always good to talk. And just a point of accuracy, just for Mark Durkin's point, we called it, and it was clear the parties were going to support it, and it was going to pass the House. But we called it. Our conscience is clear, Mark. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
All right, okay. Can I then bring Mark back in again?
Oh, sorry, this doesn't have the same effect as being in the room, but when Paul had suggested charging the officials, I was going to propose a 10% discount.
Oh dear. We can always rely on Mark to have the last quick. All right, look, thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, David and Rhonda. It's really good to have you with us this morning. It was timely, actually, you being in with us this morning. So I hope we haven't given you too many more headaches to think about as the rest of the day goes on. So thanks for your time.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. All right, members, we're going to then move along to agenda item 8, which is a briefing on the work of the Community Development Networks Forum. Members, you'll find a copy of this briefing paper is at page 60 of your packs. So are members in agreement that we forward a copy of the paper to RAISE, who are preparing a paper for us on urban and rural community networks? So members agreed with that. I know none of you are here, but I'm sure none of you will disagree with that. I can see your faces, but I can't hear you. So yeah, I think that should be fine. So can I then welcome to the meeting, we have Kathy Polly, who is ARDS Community Network, Janice Cherry, who is Carrickfergus Community Network, Raymond Jackson from the Confederation of Community Groups, Louise Little, who is from North Down Community Network, Roisin McLaughlin from Northwest Community Network, and Deborah Neal from Larne Community Development Project. There you are. That was a mouthful. I just wanted to give you, and I don't even know if you are all on yet, but I just thought I'd read out the listener. A bit of feedback coming from me. So I just say to you, whenever any of the members are speaking, if you put yourselves on silent until we bring you in, that would be helpful. Kathy, I think it's yourself, I understand, that is going to brief the committee, and then we will go into questions. Is that fair enough? Yeah.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you very much, Paula. Thanks, folks. Thanks for having us today and fitting us into your busy schedule. I'm Kathy Polly. I'm chair of the Community Development Networks Forum, and I also work here at ARDS Community Network in Newton ARDS. So I'll introduce the others that are, well, Paula gave a brief overview of who's with us today. It's not even all of us, I think, are here this morning. So we want to thank you for fitting us into your busy schedule at the end of this mandate. I suppose we also want to take this opportunity to wish you all well in the forthcoming elections and say that we look forward to working with you all come May and June and summertime and get chatting to you all then when you are back with a new mandate. I suppose I just want to briefly say a bit about Community Development Networks Forum for anybody who doesn't or hasn't met us before. We had luckily the opportunity to meet with Paula and Stephen and a couple of the other committee members before Christmas, and we had a great chat. It was lovely to just connect again after a couple of years of not having been with yourselves and not seeing and contacting our MLAs in the committee just as much as we normally would under normal circumstances. So the Community Development Networks, if you have the wee paper, is made up of 11 community infrastructure networks from across the region. So there's a whole list of us: ARDS, Armagh, Banbridge, Craigavon, the Building Communities Resource Centre, Carrickfergus Community Forum, Causeway Rural and Urban Network, the Confederation of Community Groups, NURI, East Belfast Community Development Agency, Focus OMA, Larne Community Development Project, North Down Community Network, and Northwest Community Network. So we have met as a Community Development Networks Forum for as long as I can remember, which it might be 20 odd years, so it might. And we focus on delivering community development support services right across the borough. when we were first funded, we were funded by DSD, Community Sustainability Project, for any of you that can remember that far back to 3.3. It makes me feel old even to say it. And we have always received our core, as we call it, running costs and small amounts of money from the department under the Community Infrastructure Fund. And this has been key to the delivery of everything we do. Because then we take that small budget, small amount of money, which has been ever reducing over the years, and work with all of the different departments, the Public Health Agency, the Executive Office, the peace programmes, the health and wellbeing programmes, and work with our communities then to bring in those monies and resources to deliver a wide range of programmes, everything from rural support services, capacity building programmes, anti-poverty programmes. There's a whole list. You'll have it in your wee paper there, and you can do a bit of reading when you want to. I suppose we wanted to take this opportunity just to talk with the committee and say that although it's been extremely difficult over the last 2 years, which everybody knows all about, that it has really given our communities and our volunteers in all of our areas the chance to really shine. From the 23rd of March 2020, every single one of the networks was on the ground, and we called it, I think in the paper you'll see, delivering community localism, because we were there from the 23rd of March when it was difficult for the statutory bodies to function, and still is, might I add, due to the restrictions on them, for us to be present at a grassroots level in our communities, delivering all sorts of services. So the networks were able to work with all of our communities and get all of those programmes that were funded by DFC, and the majority of them funded by DFC, out there and working on the ground. So we have a paper, and during it we wrote a paper on that coordinated localism. There's far too much to say. There's some brilliant examples in there. Many of our networks played a key part, including ourselves, of delivering the council's programmes and delivering the food bank programmes, delivering advice services. All of the services continued and more. You know, anything that DFC fired out at us, we were able to make it work on the ground. So it's been an interesting time, but at the minute we wanted just to engage with yourselves, to let you know about all of the brilliant work that has been going on out there, that is organised and coordinated by the networks. To also mention too that at the minute every single one of us are mad keen to get off here, because we have our bid to have in for the Community Investment Fund tomorrow. So you can all know that who's actually finished it and who's still trying to frantically cut and paste bits from somewhere. So we're on that, and that's a 2-year budget. But what we really want to do is to have this time to communicate with yourselves, for you to ask us any questions about what we've been up to, and for any of the other networks to say about the brilliant work that they've been doing. Because, you know, Paula, I'll tell yourself, before November, when we met in person at Stormont, it was lovely just to exchange the different work that's going on in ARDS with OMA, and the different work with, and that's what we get the Chances networks to do all the time. And we'd like to share that in your new mandate going forward with yourselves as a committee, and also with the department and the officials up there, to just have the best community development support framework that we can have in Northern Ireland, because at the minute that framework as such doesn't exist. And a number of our networks found it challenging during COVID, because there would be more of an existence of a framework for the rural networks who directly delivered programmes, whereas an awful lot of the urban networks had to work through councils to make that money work on the ground, which was a bit slower and added another layer, whereas the networks funded by the department for all of these years are there and were able to deliver from the word go on the 23rd of March. And so there's loads of stuff in that wee paper. We're also always working on other things like our anti-poverty work and our poverty paper. And we had met with Kelly too down here in ARDS to just feed her that information. And I suppose it's just about that information exchange. We'd like to do as much of that as we can with yourselves over the coming months, and once you're all back in post, and just build on the work that has been done, and the amount of volunteer and time that has been put in over the last 2 years by everybody in our community. There's loads in there, but I suppose I'd rather let other people say a bit, and you get the chance to talk to us and see if there's anything that you'd like to know or ask.
Look, that's grand. Kathy, thank you very much for that, and thank you for your paper. And you're absolutely right. That was very informative whenever you came to the Assembly. It was after a committee meeting one Thursday in November up to room 115, and some members that were in the building were able to go up and have a chat with you. And I suppose what I took away from that, and that's why I was quite keen for you to come in and brief the committee today, was just the collaborative working between you all. It very much, it's not a case of reinventing the wheel. In each area, you work very closely together. You share thoughts, share ideas, share best models of practice. So I came away from that thinking, yeah, this is extremely worthwhile, and this is something that I thought the committee should hear a bit more about. You'd mentioned in your paper that you'd like the department to enhance its relationship with the Community Development Network to support more effective partnership working. Just if you want to, just explain a wee bit more what you feel the department needs to do to enhance those relationships.
Janice, do you want to say a bit, or? Oh, Janice is frozen a bit.
No, you go ahead.
No, well, over the years, the department, I suppose we would have met with them, and we would have been quite close with our project officials and all, and we would have got the opportunity. I remember 20 years ago meeting with Maeve Walls at the time, and they're looking at the programmes for work and how it ties into a programme for government and how it ties into the OBAs. But I suppose it's just for us so that there's it's just to have that input into any forthcoming piece of work. At the minute, there is no framework or no strategy, so at times it can be a bit bitter, and sometimes we react more. It would be nice to have a community development support framework. The Community Investment Fund sort of grew quite organically over 20 years. There's a women's sector, and then there's the volunteer sector, and there's all the different bits within DFC, and community development sometimes feels like it has no real place. It's just it has no framework, and it would be nice to have a framework that we are delivering on and a bit more sustainability. So for the last number of years, it's been year-on-year funding. This is the first opportunity, I think, in about 10 years to look at even 2 years, which is nice. But I think what COVID proved for everybody was that when crises hit, the amount of investment that has been put in by the department over the years just came to life, and because we could immediately coordinate everything that we do already have those trusted relationships with all of our communities, our most vulnerable people. We could deliver on all of the policy, the poverty policies, the finance, the food, the fuel poverty. So we can do anything because we have that infrastructure working across Northern Ireland, and sometimes that has no real place within the department, and it would be nice to see that an infrastructure that the department built has a real place. So it does. Sometimes the rural networks seem to sit very nicely within DAERA. And then during COVID, because they have such a strong relation with DAERA, they quickly swapped to DFC and directly took large amounts of money to deliver on the ground. And I suppose some of our networks who don't have the same relationships with their council, because not all of us do, have those relationships, struggle then to access the money and the resources that they needed to meet the needs that people were identifying with us on the ground every day. At a time when the council offices were closed and the job centres were closed and all statutory provision was closed, doctor surgeries are closed, the networks were open on the 23rd of March and delivering, and continue to do so. There's not a week in here our staff are getting COVID haven't been here working with local people. And we want that embedded within the department. We want that to be there, sustainable. Like one of the questions in the bid at the minute that's being tomorrow is about our sustainability. And you always feel like writing dear knows. I remember writing 20 years ago to Sean, have you got a crystal ball? We don't know. Our income has massively deteriorated. Our income generation streams for our network centres and our room usage and things that we would usually prop up all of our programmes with has massively deteriorated in the last 2 years. But still we continue and we utilise the resources as best as we can. So we would just like to have more of a conversation with yourselves, with the department, to embed that community development, that vital community development support services within the department. That, you know, we have always believed that's where it sits. I remember the committee in Derry asking 20 years ago, Simon Hamilton was chairing at the time, where do you want to be? You know, council and MLAs are splitting up and they had to be one or the other. Where do you want to be? And we're like, we sit within the department. You know, that's where this work sits as community development support services. And nothing has changed. You know, if now it's more important than ever. So it would be just nice to have that conversation and that engagement between us all, and that sharing of ideas and information and resources. You know, we all work best down here in Ards when we work with our councillors and our MLAs offices and our MPs and our statutory bodies, the housing executive, the police. And we would like to formalise that relationship and that programme within the department. Raymond, does anybody else? I could talk forever about that, but maybe some of the others, I don't know, Raymond maybe has thoughts on that? No, there's nobody else playing.
I think you answered that pretty fully there, Cathy. So you did, I have to say. And I suppose it's something that I've been an MLA 11 years. And it's something that I've seen through my time that we develop a grouping, and we give them, we build up their capacity, we do all of those things which are wonderful, and then someone else comes along and says, oh, here, I have a bright idea of something else we could be doing, so let's do it this way. And as I said earlier, I mean, you use as a collegiate group certainly have a lot of knowledge sharing, and know that you don't need to reinvent the wheel because you've been doing it for 20 years now. So that sometimes that really annoys me that someone new maybe comes into the department, or even a new minister, whatever it might be, and decide, no, I think we could do this differently, when we know what you're doing is spot on. And you've, as you say, you have built up such a network, whether that's through statutory agencies or whether that is actually through the voluntary community sector and everybody else. I mean, and I know because Janice is quite close to me, just, the work that is being done down there, and that stretches right across into North Belfast as well, some of that. So, I have lots of praise for the community networks. I know, Stephen, you have indicated that you want to come in. Any other members that want to ask questions, can they please raise their hand? Cathy, did you want to come back there?
Yeah, I did too, because I sort of thought it made it sound like we're quite heavily resourced at the minute. And just while we're sitting with our applications forms in front of us, we want to thank the department because we got a 2% uplift for the first time ever. So we truly appreciate that, and our 7% for our fair pay. So yes, thank yous for that. But could I also just mention, in case any of you have any doubt about how much community investment fund money we get, I don't know about the others, we're all quite similar, but our running cost budget that I'm working on at the minute, do you want to have a guess? Now, I'm not talking the salaries because we get 2 core salaries each, so most of us operate. But if I had to ask you just really cheekily, how much do you think my running cost budget with a 2% uplift is running at the minute?
I don't even want to guess, Cathy. Go ahead and tell us.
Well, it's 3.5 grand.
That's shameful, isn't it?
I know. So, I don't know, maybe somebody else, see if any of you lot are getting more than me, you're in trouble. But, we are not talking about 50, 60,000 pound programmes here. Once we get our 2 core posts out of that, and 3.5 grand, and I'm sitting in a 6,500 pounds or 6,500 square metres building, which was funded by DSD under modernisation, which I have to work out how to fit a new lift motor in for 3.5 grand. It all just doesn't tie up. So we have to then go out and pull in maybe 10 other funding pots just to make the delivery of actually any of our programmes, our employability programmes, our poverty programme, our training programme. We have to pull all of that in from all of the other sources, which is a massive task, plus actually be out on the ground with our communities delivering. So sometimes you think, when the officials send you an email and you haven't answered in 2 days, that you're sitting at home. We are not. We are out there with our communities. And then we go home at night and start writing bids for programmes from all of the other departments. So we are not talking about we get hundreds of thousands of pounds here. I'm talking about a running budget of 3.5 grand you know, and not, I don't think there's any of them any different unless you're one of the big voluntary sector organisations, which are also under programmes like the Regional Infrastructure Programme, massively invested in, heavily invested in, to the tune of millions, and the community networks, although we're not griping, are sitting, you know, with pittance, and you sort of wonder, you know, you talk about equity and a fair distribution of resources, and you sort of wonder, you know, I could get a lottery bid done quicker than I could apply for what I do under CIF, but we still want to be there because we want to sit within that department, delivering what we deliver, and delivering the CIF outcomes which we believe align with our own. So yeah, that was my wee bit on how little we get, but thank you anyway.
No bother. Kathy, Deborah, I don't know if you were able to get yourself unmuted there or not. No, just don't. That's okay. That's all right. I'm going to bring in, I've got Stephen and I've got then Kira. So can I bring in Stephen first, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Kathy, for your briefing and your presentation. I would just like to briefly, you know, echo some of the comments of the Chair there, you know, and commend the good work that you're doing. I know we had a useful discussion just before Christmas at Stormont, and it was great, obviously, to hear the local element, but the work that goes on right across Northern Ireland in many towns. And I suppose highlighting, I think it is vital that the department, as you pointed out in your briefing paper, recognises the importance of community development networks. And I know locally the North Down Community Network and the very positive work that Louise and her team is doing down there, certainly in the town centre location that she's recently located in is fantastic. And I think having been down there and seeing it for myself, you know, that drop-in element is vital. And I think another point that is vital of the community development networks, the work that they actually do supporting community groups, you know, with which can often be tricky funding applications, for example, and that practical in-person support, you know, I know from community groups is so vital to ultimately get them funding. So keep up your good work. I just want to commend you, and certainly know the work of Kathy and Louise through my area as a local MLA in North Down, and the good work that they do. Just one question in terms of engagement with councils. Probably each group probably have a different answer, but you know, do you feel you have enough support, you know, from councils? Obviously, they should play a key role. They've all got community development teams, and community and wellbeing, you know, is a central theme of every council. Thank you.
Just before you come back in and answer that, if it's Antoinette that's looking after our Starleaf this morning, some of the members have our participants have messaged to say that even when they have no way of unmuting, I don't know if we've muted them all. There we are. I'm starting to see that them being removed. The only one that still has a mute is Deborah beside her. Deborah, if you unmute your end, if you can now. There we are. Now we can hear you all now, Jude. Go ahead, Deborah. Did you want you messaged earlier through?
Yeah, no, it was just to say that I'm from Lauren Community Development Project, and a bulk of our time is actually spent trying to fundraise and get funding applications in just to pay our rent and our overheads, which takes away time then for supporting our local 75 member groups. It was just that part.
No, thank you for that. And were there any other of you there that wanted to come in and comment before I moved on to Stephen? And apologies for the mute thing.
If I could just respond to what Stephen has said there, and I'm sure Kathy will feel the same way. I mean, I think, and Kathy alluded to it earlier, there is such a range of relationships across the various networks with council in their local communities. You know, when COVID came, what was wonderful in the midst of the crisis was that council and various departments were very willing to try and kind of get resources on the ground quickly. There was still obviously kind of certain procurement or sort of procedures that we had to follow in terms of funding things, which is all very understandable, but the money hit the ground much faster and we were able to take a much more responsive approach and were able to react faster, showing that money can be trusted to come to community in larger quantities and in a much easier way. Bureaucracy is something that, you know, you guys know very well up in Stormont, how challenging that can actually be. And as Stephen said, for very small charities and community organisations organisations, it's an impossibility without support from organisations like ours. I would certainly say that there's been improvement in some ways, Stephen, from our perspective anyway, in the Ards and North Down Borough Council relationships. But what I'm certainly finding now is, as we're kind of moving out of COVID times, we're starting to move back into more bureaucracy, the same systems in place, and very limited learning as to what kind of, how systems could be simplified when it comes to groups access and funding, engaging with council. It's still a very bureaucratic process that's in many ways quite formal, and it doesn't actually need to be. So it could always be enhanced, and I think we could really kind of be doing with some support for learning at a broader sort of community level and the council level across all political parties about it being a more simplified relationship. But I'm sure Kathy can add to that, certainly from the Ards North Down perspective. But it's not bad, but it could certainly be better, and the learning and lessons could be kind of implemented a bit more.
Sorry folks, can I come in there? Just Raymond Jackson. I'm with the Confederation of Community Groups based in Ballybot House in Newry, covering basically the Newry, Mourne and Down areas. So nice to meet you folks. Sorry I was delayed getting on to this morning, so I missed a lot of Kathy's presentation there. But I think we need to come back, folks, to express that we are independent, and certainly independent of councils as well. And just in relation to Stephen's point there, folks, we see ourselves very much based around that programme from a government stuff, and directly with the department, as in yourselves, Department for Communities yourselves, rather than with local councils. We all do have different, and we've always got on with the councils for different programmes, etc., etc. And down here, to be honest with you, we have a very good relationship with our council, and in fact, we are a part of a strategic stakeholder forum, which is basically the mainstream community volunteer groups across Newry, Mourne and Down sit on that forum, and 3 of us, including myself, sit on what is called a community coordination hub in the Newry, Mourne and Down area. That hub actually has been the first point of call for all COVID response stuff, access to food, all that type of thing. So there's a very good working relationship with the council, I would suggest, and that's what we all prefer, to work in partnership with all statutory bodies. But we have to stress the importance of being independent. If, for instance, all of our funding, etc., came directly from the council would want us to run like a service level agreement to run their programmes, and we are not here just to run council programmes. We are here to run programmes for the benefit of all in the community, and not be tied into one particular dominated council, or etc., etc. So it's very much that we must maintain our independence from councils, even though we will work in partnership with all of those councils.
Okay, Stephen, how are you?
Yes, great, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
All right.
Everybody else.
Thank you. Stephen, could I bring in Ciara, please?
Obviously, first and foremost, I need to declare conflict of interest here, because I worked for 20 years with the group, and managed it, funded under the Community Investment Fund. So I agree with everything that Kathy has said. I know exactly where you've been over the years regarding, I remember 10 years ago, we were just all top sliced, and we're going, and then ever since, the efficiency savings. So you had 3%, we had 0 running costs, not a penny of running costs, and a 1.5 salary. So I know, and likewise, and obviously, hopefully, I can't see Roisin, but I know the work that the networks do. So it's been fantastic work, Lifeline, and I think it's critical. All the more important networks are even more critical now, because it's about collaboration, working together on the ground, grassroots, bringing organisations together and being that voice to represent people in communities, and a range of different interest groups as well. So I think it's critically important. Just one of the questions I would like to ask in relation to the Community Investment Fund and the 36 organisations. Obviously, it's yourselves as networks, there's urban area partnerships, and there's the women's sector. And many a year we would have got together with the community and voluntary unit and had them conversations and discussions. And I know COVID hasn't helped this past few years, but has there been, maybe, is that something that as the 36 organisations could come together on? We are waiting, and I know we've all been waiting for the anti-poverty strategy. It's key. So it's obviously it's a question we need to be asking where that will be now and where will that sit in the coming days, weeks, months, because obviously that's critical, and I'm sure you have all been engaging in that as well and moving forward. But 100% agree, core community infrastructure and particularly the networks, it's 10, 12 years where there has been no review, no additional investment, and it's getting harder and harder, despite the fact your workload has increased and you have done amazing work over COVID. So it's probably two questions, maybe. What kind of engagement with the voluntary community unit regarding the 36 organisations as a collective? Your level of engagement with the department officials on the anti-poverty strategy, and maybe where that's at and how you feel that's going and where you are placed within that and moving forward. So thank you.
Do you want me to answer that at the minute? Yeah, Paula? Yeah. Thanks for that, Ciara. That's lovely to hear, and it's also so lovely when you've got somebody like yourself who totally understands, you know, the situation, and that we do this because we wouldn't do anything else. You know, no matter how little we get. If we had to run it, I'll not say if we had to run it voluntary, because that might be the next suggestion. But we do it because we want to be out there helping the people. And your answer to the thing, I think the last time we all came together, because we're quite a feisty bunch, the 36 of us, you know, far a few Bernadette McAllisters in there, and the department just love us. So I think the last time was Clifton House, and it was organised by Russell Makaki, who is no longer there. I think he's living a high life in Morocco somewhere. So we met because they had decided they were going to give the programme to councils at the time. So unfortunately, we meet whenever we're at risk, which we would actually like to meet when we're always at risk, but we'd like to actually, because we feel that when the 6 of us are together, we have the best infrastructure right across, you know, the whole area. And if we weren't competing against each other so much, like we have to do, because we all get a bit precious about the women's stuff or the volunteering stuff, because we have to bid so heavily against each other, that we could be, you know, an absolutely brilliant total community development infrastructure. You know, the framework's already there, everything's already there, and DFC have created it by default. So we feel everything's there apart from the actual the framework, the resources for it. It's totally under-resourced, and just that desire to pull it all together. So we had discussed this briefly with Paula in our meeting in November too, that it might be nice, and I discussed it with Kelly Armstrong to meet with DFC. I've forgotten her name yet again. Moira, is it Moira? Moira Doherty, is it?
Yeah.
To meet with Moira, because we would like that chance to look at it all, and to also meet with the other 36. The nice thing during COVID was when the 11 of us couldn't take it anymore, we were able to all come together on Zoom like yourselves, carry on. So actually it was nearly better for us because we got more done, because we weren't all coming from different parts of the country and travelling to meet in Belfast and all. So like, it's a perfect opportunity for us to build on our community development networks forum grouping, which delivers right across Northern Ireland, and our rurals, which we all work closely with anyway, the 11 rurals. There's 11 of them too under DAERA, plus the women's sector, plus the volunteers. And I think the other one, we used to call them the others under Community Investment Fund. There may be like church, or is there the church organisations in there too? So like, it would be lovely. It would be lovely to, you know, everything's there. Everything's in place for DFC to have one of the best, you know, frameworks and delivery mechanisms that I've seen. I really don't think there's too much work to be done. But when we do, sometimes we go back to the very basics. What is community development? You know what? We all know what it is. And we all know how we do it. It would be just nice to be doing it in a sustainable manner for the future. Anybody? Yeah.
Just in relation then to the anti-poverty strategy and the level of engagement that you may have with the department on that.
Again, we're just not tied in enough, in my opinion. Somebody else can say we are all very heavily invested in our anti-poverty stuff on the ground in our own communities. So, for example, I chair our anti-poverty forum, which Louise and I are both on, with our council, with all of our food banks, with all of our agencies, and that works brilliantly, as do all of the other networks deal with the 3 F's, the food, the finance and the fuel poverty. Again, we feel that we rightly so, we spend a lot of time in our own areas because we can't be everywhere, but it would be nice to tie it all together and have even the likes of our anti-poverty paper. Before COVID hit, we'd done a universal, the impact on families of universal credit, because that was the big problem before COVID hit, which don't even start to think about it now yet. But it would be nice to feed that all in, and we just feel like all of this work goes on the ground all of the time with all of yous in our own areas, but we don't get the chance to link it all up and feed it all in, and then see A, what we do well together, B, where the gaps are, and C, what we could do for the future to outline that in a nice clear plan, so as everybody knows, what they're working towards. Because I always say it, if you don't know where you're going, any road you do. And it would be really nice to know where we're all going collectively and how best we can use the resources, which might I add, over COVID have been ridiculously massive. Too much for anybody to even spend. The money, and I'd said this to Paula too before Christmas, there was money fired out from the Westminster money to one of our groups in one of our areas, which is great that they got it, but it was an unspendable amount within 6 months. It was nearly £1 million, and that's not the best use of resources. So it's not, there's a much better way to use the money that is available if we just sat and strategically worked at it and planned a bit better.
I suppose I could come in there, Ciara, as well and say, yeah, there's been no formal, approach to ourselves in relation to the whole anti-poverty strategy, but we are dealing with that day in and day out through our own programmes, as well as neighbourhood renewal and that type of stuff, as Kathy was saying. Just in relation to those monies, the COVID monies, etc., yeah, there's been an unprecedented amount of money fired in through DFC, etc., and down to the local councils, and we've been helping facilitate and coordinate a lot of that money within the community and voluntary sector here as well. But yeah, I take your point there that there should be more formal engagement with bodies such as the Community Development Network Forum when they're talking about that anti-poverty strategy, rather than us all working in silos within our own community, within our own local council areas, I suppose. But we do. So we do engage with, we do reply to those things, etc. But I think there should be a more formal approach actually when any of those mainstream overarching policies come out, rather than dealing with just through neighbourhood renewal or coordination hubs, etc.
No, Raymond, I totally understand. You're that busy on the ground, networking across, delivering across a range of areas, across a range of departmental programmes to support those most vulnerable, and at times, who has got the time then to strategically, as a collective, come forward to the department? But I think that's probably an area, I know from my own experience, funded through Community Investment Fund, chairing a neighbourhood renewal partnership, etc., etc. You're just so busy on the ground and you're just so frustrated. And I know I've lobbied even the likes of the big lottery, who's looking after the networks and the core community infrastructure organisations. They're critical. They're the heart that pumps everything else that happens in our neighbourhoods and our communities. So I think I'll very much follow up with Paula, obviously, as well, and Kelly, and I'll be very much keen to meet up with yourselves. Apologies I didn't get to meet you. I had to go on and I had other engagements, but I'll be very much keen to work closely with you and follow up. And I do think, obviously, with regard to the voluntary community unit, maybe there's a conversation needs to happen again as well. We could pull all the Community Investment Fund together, but likewise, the networks are unique in what they do as well. But I think with COVID now, hopefully we're moving out. I think we can have maybe those face-to-face meetings again. I think it's good to have face-to-face as well. So all the best. Thank you.
Okay, Ciara, thank you very much. There's no other member has raised their hand to ask any further questions. Following on, just to say to you, following on from this meeting, we will look at some of those points that have been raised by yourselves, and if there's anything the committee can do to further work along with the department to try and bring everybody together to have further discussions on whatever that might be, whatever strand that might be of the work that you are doing. The committee will be more than happy to do that. So the committee will speak to the committee clerk after the meeting, and we'll see what, and if the committee can, which the committee will be able to, we'll certainly be able to write to the department. That's not a difficulty, and we will do that for you. But it will maybe be after this meeting behind the scenes, we can have that conversation and continue with that. I just I'm conscious of time here as well, so I am. Is there anything further that anybody wants to add to the meeting just before we say our goodbyes this morning? If there's anything further anybody feels that they didn't get a chance to say, or there's just another point they want to make, now's your time to do that. No, we're all right.
Could I just quickly mention to yes. Could I just, while we're on and get the opportunity to ask you, I mentioned briefly the regional infrastructure programme, and like there's many of us have felt for a long time that regional infrastructure programme is in place within the department. I know we bid for it collectively a long time ago. We were told that we weren't successful in proceeding with that because we weren't bidding with the rural networks. The rural networks never felt the need to bid to DFC because they sat within DAERA, which is fine. You know, we sat within DFC and they sat within DAERA. But I was just wondering, is that programme coming up for review again? And, you know, to me and to us, it often seemed like that was the, you know, a regional infrastructure programme basically says what we do. Although we are local and we are sub-regional, we also have this regional infrastructure right across Northern Ireland. We all are doing very much the same things and we all learn from each other, but we have a coverage right across Northern Ireland, which is what any regional organisation does. Yes, it might be based in Belfast, but it doesn't just work in Belfast. So we are exactly the same the other way. We're all based in different bits of Northern Ireland, but we still have a regional coverage. So it would be just nice maybe if the committee got a chance, if they could look at that with DFC or see if that programme's due for renewal anytime soon, because there's a...
We can certainly ask those questions, Cathy, and if there's any further questions that you want clarity on, I mean, we can as a committee. I'm quite conscious we've only a few weeks left of committee, but we can certainly write to the department and ask for clarification on any issue. That's not a problem at all. All right.
Okay, Paula, could I just say something before we finish?
Yes,
just listening to everybody, and it was a great presentation Cathy done, and were all of the wonderful things that Cathy had stated. But first and foremost, we are the first responders in each and every one of our communities for all matters. No matter what should happen, working in Carrickfergus, it's usually something to do with feuds or something to do with it, but we are always there on the ground. We're always approached, 24/7. We're not statutory bodies. We don't work from 9 to 5 and tell the community that we're closed at 5 o'clock. And I would say that for all the networks across, and it has to be recognised that most of the networks and in the communities, and especially COVID, were the first responders on the ground during COVID.
Yeah, no, I think you were right to raise that, Janice, because I don't think that you get enough recognition for just exactly the work that you do, and I know that some of it, and I know certainly in your own area, is very problematic.
Very much so.
So yeah, no, I think you certainly don't get the credit that is due to you.
And there's a lot of stuff we can't put on our reports and stuff that we are doing there, which is another issues. We skirt around it, but we can't directly report on it.
Yeah. No, I understand all of that sort of communities and transition work that you are doing and not getting the funding to do it as well. I know that. Look, thank you so much. I really am glad that we were able to find time to fit you in and come and brief the committee, and certainly reach out to those MLAs in your own areas and get those meetings set up now. To have those conversations, or maybe not now, maybe in the next mandate, because once we go into PERDA, it's all systems go for elections. But I'm really glad that you were able to come and brief us today. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye.
All right, folks, we're going to move on then to agenda item 9, which is SL1 Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order Northern Ireland 2022. Members, a copy of this SL1 is at page 68 of your meeting pack. The proposed rule will specify the percentage by which the guaranteed minimum pension element of an individual's occupational pension entitlement is increased with effect from the 6th of April 2022. Members, if we could bring all members in, please, now into the spotlight. Members, can I then just ask, have you any comments, or are you content for the department to proceed to make the rule? Content?
Content.
Good stuff. I'll move you on then to agenda item 10, which is SL1, Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order Northern Ireland 2022. You'll find a copy of this SL1 page 73. The proposed rule will specify the Pension Protection Fund levy ceiling for the financial year ending the 1st of April 2022. Again, members, any comments or content to note? Content?
Content.
Members, I mean, some of these things are the things that we do every year, so they're just don't need too much explanation on. Agenda item 11 then is SL1, the Social Security Reevaluation of Earnings Factor Order Northern Ireland 2022. You'll find a copy of this SL1 at page 77. So this proposed rule will provide that earnings factors relating to national insurance contributions for historic tax years used in the calculation of additional state pension and guaranteed minimum pension maintain their value in line with the increase in average earnings. So again, members, I'm going to ask if you any comments. Are you content for the department to proceed to make that rule?
Content, yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to move on then to additional agenda item tabled SL1. The Social Security Benefits Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022. Members, by way of background to this proposed rule, the Department introduced the Social Security Claims and Payments Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2021, to provide for the payment of large arrears of benefit in instalments, where it would be in the claimant's best interest to do so. And these regulations were agreed by the committee back on the 30th of September 2021. It has been brought to the department's attention by the Benefits Guidance Centre that there is an error in the drafting of the 2021 regulations. This has unintentionally caused confusion regarding the application of the 2021 regulations. Officials had advised the clerk that the regulations as they stand provide an accidental restriction to the benefits that can be paid in instalments, which conflicts with the actual amendment made to the claims and payment regulations by the October 2021 regulations. The removal of the provision is the most appropriate way to resolve the conflict. So in order to avoid any future problems for claimants who may wish to avail of payments by instalments, it is prudent for the department to act quickly to correct this error. Members, again, any comments, or are you content for the department to proceed to make the rule? Content?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to move us on then to agenda item 12, which is correspondence. Remember, you'll find the correspondence memo at page 84. Can I draw your attention to page 85, which is correspondence from the Executive Office Committee in relation to the draft investment strategy for Northern Ireland? Members, we asked for this to be reconsidered at this week's meeting, and I suggest a short closed session at the end of the meeting to discuss further and formulate a response. A memo from the clerk on this matter is in your table papers, so we're going to go into a short closed session after the meeting. Members agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Very good stuff. Then can I turn you then to page 191? There's a memo from CLG in relation to its report on strengthening committee scrutiny. Members do want to submit a response on the report. Are we content to note? I would be content to note. I'm just quite conscious we're coming to the end of this mandate. Our clerks have an awful lot of work to do. So would members be content to note that?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay.
Yep.
All right, folks. Where else am I? What am I on to? Oh, yeah. I want to touch on two pieces of correspondence in your table papers. The first is in relation to the PAC report on the Sports Sustainability Fund. Members, please note that this report is embargoed until Friday, and I propose that we discuss that also in more detail at the end of the meeting in the closed session because it is embargoed. The other piece of correspondence is in relation to the betting bill and a notice of amendments for further consideration stage on Monday. Members, we're going to have a short briefing session on these amendments now. So if members happy enough, then we'll move on to that with Martina. Yeah?
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah.
Okay, right. Can we bring Martina in, please? Hiya, Martina. How are you? We can't hear you. Are you on silent? Oh, no. Okay, we can't hear Martina for some reason. Okay. No, nothing there. Okay, Martina's gone off and going to come in again. I'm going to ask members then in the interim, while we're waiting Martina coming back, is there anything else under correspondence members wanted to raise there? No? No, happy enough for the memo then? Okay, I'm going to move you on to agenda item 13, which is our forward work programme. Members, next week's meeting we will be briefed by the Department on the Women Involved in Community Transition, or the WICT programme. Following on from the issues I raised last week that from TWN, that they felt the committee was misled, and also letting us know what's going to happen to all of those women that actually finish this programme at the end of next month. So that's why we've called them in. Also, we're hoping to hear from the Department on the Supporting People programme. I don't think that has been finalised as yet, but we're hoping that they will be able to come in also and brief us, and then we're going to receive briefings from Shelter NI and Leonard Cheshire. So can I ask, are members content to note the forward work programme? Yeah, content? Yeah, okay. There's Martina's back with us, so I'm going to bring Martina back in again.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yay, we can, Martina.
Brilliant. I think I was waiting so long in the wings there, it must have cut me off somehow. So good morning, and just want to take you quickly through the amendments. There's 3 which Minister has tabled for consideration stage next Monday. And the one that I'm sure you're very interested in is the new clause 7A. So it inserts into the bill, what it is doing in effect is rearranging Article 108 of the 1985 order on gaming machines. And the reason we needed to do this was because the order as structured didn't allow us to set different stakes and prizes limits for different premises. And you've heard from NIACTA and others the difficulties that has. So the amendment does not in any way alter or extend the type of premises that may apply for a gaming machine. It doesn't change the application process. It doesn't alter the current limits for stakes and prizes. So the current limits are 30p stake and £25 prize. At a later date, we will bring forward secondary legislation, which will be that by affirmative resolution, and will of course be subject to full discussion with the committee. So this amendment supersedes the legislation that we talked about last week or the week before. The Minister has withdrawn the motion for debate on the order, so that motion, that legislation will fall. Just to say that this amendment isn't departing in any way from the agreed policy. We would see it as being a tidy up of Article 108. So for the second and third amendments, these are technical amendments which are aimed at making the amendment past the consideration stage fully workable in practice. So firstly, what the amendment is doing is removing subsection 11 of clause 15, and this is the section which refers to serious, significant, continuing or multiple breaches. And that particular section is no longer needed, because what Legislative Council has drafted for us is he has inserted that requirement into every license that the department issues. So he's kind of strengthened it in a way. And it also establishes a more explicit basis for revoking or refusing to renew gambling licenses, certificates or permits. And in the interests of comprehensiveness and consistency, we have also extended the amendment to include bookmaking office licenses, bingo club license and lottery certificates, which were omitted from the original amendment. And that's basically it. We've dropped the word significant, and it's we consider that serious and significant have similar meanings in law, so we're content that we haven't in any way diluted the amendment, and we feel that we've made it a little bit stronger in extending it and workable in practice. So that's all I have, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Martina. And yeah, I agree with you on that. The way you have structured those amendments certainly does helps greatly. I very much acceptable. If I could just go back to the NIACTA issue.
Yeah.
They had written and wanted to come in and brief the committee before this went to the Assembly, but you say that's now been withdrawn, so that is good. And looking at that, at the amendment you've brought forward, I believe that has somewhat relieved the issues that NIACTA had. I don't know if you've had conversations with them or you know that they're content with that as well, which I hope they would be. So I think that kind of resolves the issue, and I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you very much for taking that on board and for running with that. So no, that's been very, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for that. Yes, both myself and Liam have spoken to Gerald Steenberg, and we believe that they're content and with the assurance that Minister will bring forward, or incoming Minister will bring forward, a new order in the mandate. The reason, I suppose I should have said this, one of the reasons why we couldn't let the order stand is that the bill would kind of knock it out. So depending on timing, and we couldn't be sure on timing, you could have had the increased stakes for a day or two and then royal assent and it reverts back. So we couldn't take that risk.
Yeah.
So
no, look, thank you. That's grand. I have Anya waiting to come in. If we can bring Anya in, please.
Yes, Chair, thank you. And just following on from your comments there and Martina's, I know after last week we had the discussion in terms of the SL. I had some serious concerns over the weekend, and I'd actually considered tabling an amendment myself. But look, I firstly want to welcome the Minister's amendment and Martina's update. As you said, it essentially is just tidying up at this stage, and the fact that NIACTA have come in behind it as well. But no, I just want to put that on record, Chair. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anya. Thank you. No other member is asked or has asked to come in and ask anything further, Martina. So that's us finished.
I've got off lightly then, Chair.
After that long wait, I know.
I know. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martina. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, members, I'm going to move on then to agenda item 14, which is any other business of members, any other business they wish to bring up. In fact, can we bring all members in? Maybe it would be helpful because I can't hear you otherwise. There we are. You're all back in the meeting now. So you are. So any other business there? Sorry. Nope. Okay. Can I then move on to agenda item 15, which is date, time and location of our next meeting? So members, our next meeting will take place next Thursday, the 3rd of March at 9:30 a.m. in room 29. Members, we're now going to go into a short closed session to discuss the committee report on the draft investment strategy and the PAC report. So members agreed. Now we'll move in. That's our meeting finished. We're going to move into closed session.